Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. I've debated posting this for years. I've only told a handful of people, and most just give me that look. You know the one. But I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone here has seen something similar. This happened back in October 2000. I was 8 years old, and my family had just moved to this really isolated house outside Eminence, Missouri. And when I say isolated, I mean it. Our property was surrounded by miles of oak and hickory forests. We had this little creek that ran downhill from our house, and there were these old cattle fences dividing up parts of the land. My dad, Richard, was the reason we moved there. He worked these crazy long hours at his job, and he wanted to come home to peace and quiet. He was also big on us kids experiencing country living, whatever that meant to him. I was the youngest of 3 boys, so I spent a lot of time playing by myself. Dad had parked this old camper behind our house soon after we moved in. It was nothing special, just this beat-up old thing from the 70s with faded striping on the sides and a little kitchenette inside that didn't even work. But to me, it was the coolest thing ever. Dad said I could use it as my clubhouse, and I spent almost every afternoon after school in there, reading comics or playing with my action figures. The day it happened was a Tuesday. I remember because we'd had a math test that day, and I was feeling pretty good about getting home and not having homework. It was one of those perfect fall days, not too hot, not too cold. The trees were all these amazing colors of red and gold. Mom had made me a sandwich when I got home, and I'd taken it out to my camper to eat while I looked through my newest Batman comic. We had a bunch of dogs, these little yappy chihuahuas that my mom loved, and one big Rottweiler named Duke that was supposed to be our guard dog. Duke was the best, super protective but gentle with us kids. I'd been in the camper maybe 20 minutes when all the dogs started going crazy, barking like they'd completely lost their minds. It wasn't the normal, someone's pulling into the driveway bark. This was different, frantic. I put down my comic and went to the camper door to see what was going on. At first, I just saw the dogs running back and forth along the fence line, barking at something in the woods. Then I spotted this fawn, a baby deer, darting along the fence. It looked scared, like it was trying to find a way through to get to the deeper woods. That's when I saw it. Between 2 massive oak trees, maybe 50 yards away, this reddish-brown figure stepped into the open. My first thought was that it was a man, maybe a hunter, even though it wasn't quite hunting season yet. But as I squinted to see better, I realized whatever this was, it definitely wasn't a person. It was huge, way taller than my dad, who was 6 feet. And the shoulders on this thing were just massive, like a football player wearing shoulder pads. But it was all natural. The whole body was covered in this clay-colored hair or fur. Not super long and shaggy like you see in movies, but more like a short, dense coat. I don't know why, but I called out, "Hello?" Not loud, just confused, I guess. When it turned toward me, I felt every hair on my body stand up. Its face, God, I still see it in my dreams sometimes. The skin on its face was darker under patchy hair, almost like it had less hair there. The eyes were set deep, shadowed under a prominent brow. But it was the mouth that really got me, unnaturally wide, stretching across its face. And its nose was flat and spread, with these huge nostrils. I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were cemented to the ground. I watched as this thing, this creature, stepped over our 5-foot fence like it was nothing. Just one casual step, and it was over. No climbing, no jumping, just stepped over it like it was a small log or something. As it got closer, this smell hit me. This strong, musky odor mixed with wet earth and something sour, like rotting meat. It was so strong I could taste it in the back of my throat. I remember gagging slightly. Duke, who wasn't afraid of anything, let out one deep bark before backing away. His hackles were raised, and he was doing this low growl I'd never heard before. The chihuahuas had already scattered and were hiding under the camper, completely silent, which was weird for them. The creature stood there, maybe 30 feet from me now, and just stared. I don't know how long we looked at each other. Probably just seconds, but it felt like hours. There was intelligence in those eyes. It was studying me. I'm sure of it. Then, without any warning, it turned and disappeared behind some cedar trees. It moved so fast for something so big. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone. I ran to the house, stumbling and nearly falling twice. I burst through the back door, probably white as a sheet, and started trying to tell my dad what I'd seen. I was talking so fast and probably not making any sense. Dad sat me down at the kitchen table and gave me a glass of water. "Slow down, Danny," he said. "Take a breath and tell me again." I tried to explain, but I could tell he wasn't really buying it. He thought I'd seen a bear maybe, or my imagination had run wild with some deer or hiker I'd spotted. But he could see I was genuinely terrified, so he didn't dismiss me outright. "Why don't you draw what you saw?" he suggested, pushing a notepad and pencil toward me. I wasn't a great artist, but I tried my best to draw what I'd seen: the broad shoulders, the reddish-brown hair, the wide mouth and flat nose. Dad looked at my drawing for a long time, his face unreadable. "Let's keep this between us for now," he finally said, folding the paper and putting it in his pocket. "No need to scare your mom or brothers." But I could tell something had changed. Dad started checking the locks on the doors more carefully at night. He'd stand on the back porch sometimes, just staring out into the woods. And he started taking his rifle when he went to check the mail at the end of our long driveway. A few weeks later, during deer season, Dad went hunting alone one morning. He came back earlier than expected, looking shaken. It took some prodding, but he finally told me what happened. He'd been in his deer stand before dawn, waiting for the sun to come up. He spotted a nice buck and was getting ready to take his shot when he heard something heavy approaching from behind him. He said the ground actually trembled slightly. The buck, obviously sensing danger, bolted. Dad turned around, thinking it might be another hunter trespassing on our property. "Hello? Who's there?" he called out. What answered wasn't human. Dad described it as a sound like a roar and scream combined, loud enough that it hurt his ears. Then there was the sound of branches breaking overhead, like something large was moving through the trees. Dad grabbed his rifle and got out of there as fast as he could. He didn't actually see anything, but he said he knew. He just knew. It was the same thing I'd encountered. That night was when things got really frightening. Around midnight, we started hearing something pacing behind our fence line. Back and forth, back and forth. Occasionally, that same terrifying roar scream would split the night. Duke, our fearless guard dog, hid under the porch and wouldn't come out no matter how much we called him. He didn't bark once, just whimpered. Dad and my teenage brothers grabbed their rifles and took turns keeping watch. Mom, my brother's girlfriends, and I stayed in the living room, away from windows. The pacing continued until dawn, when it finally stopped. We didn't have any other encounters that winter. Spring came, and life kind of went back to normal. But I never went back to playing in that camper. Dad eventually sold it, and I was relieved. I'm 29 now, and I still live near Eminence. I've never forgotten a single detail of that day. The reddish hair, that distinctive smell, the way it just stepped over our fence like it was nothing. The intelligence in those eyes. Sometimes I wonder if it remembers me, too. I've read about Bigfoot sightings over the years, but what I saw doesn't match most descriptions. The color was wrong, more reddish than brown or black, and its proportions were different, more human-like in some ways, less in others. Even now, when I'm out in my yard at night and the dogs start barking at something near the edge of the property, I go inside and lock the doors. I don't turn on any outside lights to see what's there. Some things you just don't want to confirm. I still can't explain what I saw that day. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I know how it sounds, but I know what I saw. And sometimes, late at night when the wind is blowing through the trees outside my window, I swear I can smell that musky, earthy, sour scent again. And I lie awake, listening for the sound of heavy footsteps approaching my house. Story 2. I've been trying to make sense of what happened that night 25 years ago, but I still can't explain it. It was late October of '98, and I was 19 at the time. My dad, my 14-year-old brother Jake, and I had been coon hunting those woods since I could remember. Parker's Woods, about 5 miles from our place in rural Missouri, was practically our second home. We knew every trail, creek, and hollow like the backs of our hands, or at least we thought we did. That night started like any other hunt. We loaded up our 3 coonhounds, Duke, Sadie, and Blue, into the back of Dad's beat-up Ford pickup around 9 in the evening. The dogs were excited as always, tails wagging and barking like crazy as we pulled onto the gravel road leading to our usual hunting spot. The fall air was crisp, maybe 40 degrees, and the sky was clear with a half moon, providing decent light. "Gonna be a good night," Dad said, pulling his worn Carhartt jacket tighter. He'd been saying that same thing every hunting night for as long as I could remember. Jake was fidgeting with his flashlight, clicking it on and off like he always did when he was excited. He'd only started coming with us regularly the year before, and he still had that eagerness that Dad and I had somewhat lost over the years. We parked at our usual spot, a small clearing where an old logging road ended. The dogs jumped out immediately, sniffing around, knowing exactly what was coming. Dad checked his shotgun, a 12-gauge Remington that had belonged to his father, while I grabbed my .22 rifle. Jake had his flashlight, but no gun yet. Dad's rule was no firearms until 16. "Let's head toward Benson Creek," Dad suggested. "Saw fresh tracks there last weekend." We released the dogs from their leads, and they took off into the darkness, their tails like white flags bouncing through the underbrush. We followed the sound of their excited barks, flashlights bobbing as we navigated the familiar trail. About 20 minutes in, the dogs changed direction, heading northeast toward an area we called the Bottom, a low-lying stretch of woods we didn't visit much because it tended to flood after heavy rains. It had been dry lately, though, so we followed without hesitation. As we got deeper into the Bottom, something felt different. I remember noticing how the usual night sounds, crickets, frogs, the occasional hoot of an owl, had gone quiet. The air felt heavier somehow, like right before a thunderstorm, but the sky was clear above the tree canopy. "You feel that?" I asked Dad. He nodded, his expression serious in the flashlight glow. "Pressure change, maybe. Storm coming in." But it wasn't that. It was something else I couldn't put my finger on. We kept following the dogs barking, but after about 10 more minutes of walking, something happened that stopped us in our tracks. The barking just stopped, completely. If you've ever hunted with coonhounds, you know they don't just go silent when they're on a trail. They might change their bark when they tree something, but they don't stop unless they're scared. "Dad?" Jake's voice had a tremor I hadn't heard before. "Shh," Dad whispered, raising his hand. "Listen." We stood there in the silence, straining to hear. Then came a single low whine from one of the dogs. Sadie, I think. "This way," Dad said, moving more cautiously now, his shotgun at the ready. We pushed through a thick patch of underbrush and came into a small clearing. In the center stood a massive oak tree, easily the biggest in this part of the woods. At the base of the tree were our 3 dogs, but they weren't acting normal at all. They were standing still, hackles raised, staring up into the branches. Duke, our lead dog and the bravest hound I'd ever known, was actually trembling. Then the smell hit me. I'd smelled dead animals before, roadkill and hunting remains, but this was different. It was a thick, musky odor like wet fur mixed with something rotten and something else I can't even describe. It was so strong it made my eyes water. "What the hell is that smell?" Jake whispered, covering his nose with his sleeve. Dad didn't answer. He was looking up into the tree, his flashlight beam searching the branches. I followed his lead, pointing my light upward. That's when we heard it. A loud crack of a breaking branch about 20 feet up in the tree. All three of our flashlight beams shot toward the sound. What I saw in that moment has haunted me for 25 years. There, straddling a thick branch about 20 feet up, was something massive. At first, my brain tried to make sense of it. A bear, maybe? But no bear has proportions like that. This thing was huge, easily 7 or 8 feet tall, even in its crouched position. It was covered in thick, matted grey hair, darker in some places where it looked wet or dirty. But it was the eyes that I still see when I close mine at night. They reflected our flashlights with a deep, glowing red, not the yellow-green you'd expect from an animal. These were red like embers, and they were looking right at us. The creature was sitting almost like a person would, with impossibly long arms draped over branches on either side. Its fingers, and I'm absolutely certain they were fingers, not claws, were longer than any humans should be, maybe 8 or 9 inches, and they gripped the branches with a strength that made the wood creak. For what felt like an eternity, but was probably only seconds, we all just stared at each other. Us at it at us. I couldn't move. My legs felt rooted to the ground, and my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. I heard Jake start to hyperventilate beside me. Dad was the first to break the spell. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his shotgun, not pointing it exactly, but making it visible, a warning. That's when everything went to hell. The creature made a sound, a deep, rumbling growl that I felt more than heard, like standing next to a revving diesel engine. Then it moved with a speed that shouldn't be possible for something that size. It swung down from the branch, using those long arms to propel itself, and landed on the ground with an impact that literally shook the earth beneath our feet. I actually stumbled backward from the force of it. The dogs lost it. Duke lunged forward, barking frantically, while Sadie and Blue started howling like I'd never heard before. The creature rose to its full height, easily 8 feet tall, and let out a roar that made my ears ring. It wasn't like any animal sound I'd ever heard. It was deeper, more deliberate somehow, almost like it was trying to form words but couldn't quite manage it. "Run!" Dad shouted, firing a warning shot into the air. We didn't need to be told twice. I grabbed Jake by the shoulder and practically threw him ahead of me, and we all started sprinting back the way we came. The dogs were right with us, no longer brave hunters but terrified prey. I heard crashing behind us, branches breaking and undergrowth being smashed aside. I've never run so fast in my life. My lungs were burning, and branches whipped across my face, drawing blood, but I didn't slow down. Jake was ahead of me, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Dad was bringing up the rear, and I heard him fire another warning shot behind us. "Keep going," he yelled. "Don't look back." But of course I did look back, just once, and I saw it, moving through the forest maybe 50 yards behind us. Not running exactly, but covering ground in huge, loping strides, ducking under branches that would have stopped a man. Those red eyes still visible in the darkness. We somehow made it back to the truck. Jake got there first and was frantically pulling at the door handle. I reached him seconds later, fumbling with the keys with shaking hands. Dad arrived last, the dogs right at his heels. Get in, he shouted, literally throwing Blue and Sadie into the truck bed. Duke jumped in on his own. I finally got the door unlocked, and we all piled in, Dad in the driver's seat. He started the engine with trembling hands, and we peeled out of there, gravel flying. In the rear-view mirror, I thought I saw a dark shape at the edge of the clearing, but it might have been my imagination. Nobody spoke for the first mile. The only sounds were our heavy breathing and the dogs whining in the back. Jake was crying silently, tears streaming down his dirt-smudged face. Finally, Dad broke the silence. "Everyone okay?" His voice was steady, but his knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "What was that thing?" Jake asked, his voice cracking. Dad didn't answer right away. He kept his eyes on the road, driving faster than he should have on the winding country lanes. I don't know, he finally said, but we're not going back there. And we never did. We still went hunting after that, just never in Parker's Woods again, especially not in the bottom. We'd take a longer drive to the state forest or stick to the fields closer to home. We never talked about what happened, not really. Sometimes Jake would have nightmares and come into my room, and we'd sit in silence, both knowing what he'd been dreaming about but not saying it out loud. Dad sold those hunting dogs the next spring, said he was getting too old for tracking through the woods at night. I knew better. I've looked up everything I could find about what we might have seen, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call it. Some descriptions match, but nothing quite captures what we encountered. The red eyes, the way it moved, that sound it made. It was something else. 25 years later, and I still wake up sometimes, heart racing, convinced I can smell that musky odor in my bedroom. I still can't explain what we saw that night, and part of me doesn't want to. Some things you just learn to live with, carrying them like a weight you can never put down. But I'll tell you this, I've never gone hunting at night again. And when people ask me why, I just shrug and say I outgrew it. Because how do you tell someone you saw something in the woods that shouldn't exist? How do you explain that there are things out there we don't understand and probably never will? You don't. You just keep it to yourself and hope that whatever it was stays in those woods, far away from anywhere you call home. Story 3. I'm still having trouble sleeping after what happened last weekend. My hands are shaking as I type this, but I need to share it with someone who might understand or have experienced something similar. I'm a wildlife photographer, have been for about 7 years now. Nothing fancy, mostly freelance work for local magazines and building my portfolio. My friend Emma recently got into photography too, so we've been exploring spots together where she can practice and I can get some new material. Last Saturday morning, we drove out to Blackwater Creek. It's this beautiful wilderness area about 40 minutes from town that has some really pristine forest sections. Not many people go there because the main trails aren't well maintained, and you have to hike about a mile before reaching anything photogenic. Perfect for us though. Fewer people means less disturbed wildlife. We arrived around 8 in the morning. The parking lot was empty, except for one pickup truck that looked like it belonged to a fisherman. The air had that early autumn crispness to it, and the forest was starting to show hints of color change. Perfect lighting conditions. We hiked the main trail for about 30 minutes before I suggested we venture off to the left, where I knew there was a small tributary that feeds into the main creek. The area has these incredible moss-covered rocks and fallen trees that make for amazing macro shots. Emma was excited. She's been wanting to build her nature portfolio. We carefully made our way down the embankment. It wasn't particularly steep, but the ground was soft from recent rain. I remember thinking how quiet it was that morning. Usually, there's bird chatter, squirrels rustling in the underbrush, the typical forest ambience. But it was unnaturally still. I didn't think much of it at the time. Sometimes wildlife goes quiet when humans enter an area. We set up our gear near the creek's edge. Emma was shooting water droplets on spider webs while I was trying to capture the way sunlight filtered through the canopy onto the water. We'd been shooting peacefully for maybe 30 minutes when it happened. The roar. God, I don't know how to describe it accurately. It was deep and guttural, but not like any bear I've ever heard, and I've encountered black bears multiple times in my outdoor adventures. This was different. It reverberated through my entire body, like standing next to a massive speaker. It came from across the creek, maybe 100 yards into the thicker forest. Emma froze, her finger still on the shutter button. "What the hell was that?" she whispered. I stood up slowly, scanning the tree line. "I don't know," I admitted. Despite spending my entire adult life hiking and photographing in wilderness areas, I'd never heard anything like it. Then it happened again. A second roar, this time noticeably closer. I'd say 70 yards away. Between the roars, I could hear movement, heavy thuds, and the unmistakable sound of thick branches snapping. Whatever it was big, really big. "We need to pack up," I said quietly, already starting to dismantle my tripod. Emma nodded, her face pale. As we hurriedly packed our gear, a third roar erupted even closer. Maybe 50 yards now. I could feel the vibration in my chest. The hair on my arms stood straight up. "Is it a bear?" Emma whispered, her hands trembling as she stuffed her camera into its bag. "No," I said with absolute certainty. "Not a bear." The fourth roar came as we were shouldering our backpacks. This one was different, longer, almost like it had modulation to it, and closer still, maybe 40 yards. That's when I realized something that sent ice through my veins. It was circling us, moving in a deliberate pattern, getting closer with each pass. This wasn't random animal behavior. This felt tactical. We started moving back toward the main trail, trying to stay calm, but picking up our pace. The fifth roar stopped us in our tracks. It couldn't have been more than 30 yards away now, still across the creek, but moving parallel to us. I could hear it pushing through the underbrush, the sounds of vegetation being displaced by something massive. Through gaps in the foliage, I caught glimpses of movement, but never a clear view of what was stalking us. The sixth roar nearly made me drop my gear. It was just across the creek now, maybe 25 feet away, but obscured by dense brush. Close enough that I could smell a musky, wild odor that I've never encountered before. Then everything went silent. The kind of silence that feels physical, like pressure on your eardrums. No birds, no insects, no rustling leaves. Just complete stillness. But the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. You know that sensation when someone's staring at you and you can just feel it? Multiply that by 1,000. Emma grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in. She didn't need to speak. I knew exactly what she was thinking. Whatever it was watching us, assessing us. "Let's go," I whispered, barely audible. "Don't run, but walk fast." We made our way back to the main trail, fighting the urge to break into a sprint. Every step felt like moving through molasses, my senses hyper-aware of everything around us. The trail suddenly seemed impossibly narrow, hemmed in by dense forest on both sides. The moment we hit the main trail, I heard it again, movement in the underbrush, but now on our side of the creek. It was following us, not roaring anymore, just keeping pace, staying hidden in the thick vegetation that lined the path. We walked faster, our breathing shallow and quick. The trail back to the parking lot is about a mile long, but it felt like 10. The entire time, I could hear it moving parallel to us, sometimes getting closer to the trail, sometimes pulling back, but always there. At one point, about halfway back, Emma whispered, "It's herding us." And she was right. That's exactly what it felt like. It wasn't trying to catch us. It could have easily done that. It was escorting us out of its territory. When we were about a quarter mile from the trailhead, the sounds of pursuit began to fade. Whatever was following us was dropping back, unwilling to venture closer to the clearing where our car was parked. We reached the parking lot and practically dove into my car. The pickup truck was gone. We were alone. For several minutes, we just sat there in shocked silence, staring at the tree line, half expecting something to emerge. What was that?" Emma finally asked, her voice unsteady. "A mountain lion? They can make weird sounds sometimes, right?" I shook my head. Mountain lions sound like a woman screaming. That wasn't it, and bears don't behave like that. They don't systematically circle and herd. Whatever had stalked us was intelligent. It had purposefully intimidated us without ever showing itself. It had forced us to leave without a direct confrontation. It's been 5 days now, and I've barely slept. I keep hearing that roar in my dreams, feeling that presence watching me. I've researched every large predator in our region, listened to audio recordings of their calls. Nothing matches what we heard. I've spent my life in these forests and never felt unsafe until now. The rational part of my brain wants to dismiss it, find some logical explanation, but the primal part, the part connected to our ancestors who huddled around fires to keep the darkness at bay. That part knows we encountered something that shouldn't exist. Emma refuses to talk about it. She's deleted the few photos she took that day and says she's sticking to studio photography from now on. I haven't told anyone else until now who would believe me, but I know what I experienced. Something was out there, something intelligent, powerful, and territorial, something that wanted us gone without revealing itself. I don't know if I'll ever go back to Blackwater Creek. Part of me wants to set up camera traps, to find proof of what's living in those woods. But every time I consider it, I remember that feeling of being watched, that overwhelming sense that we were in the presence of something ancient and powerful. Whatever it was, it let us leave. I'm not sure it would be so merciful a second time. Story 4. I've been debating whether to post this for weeks. Part of me wants to forget it ever happened, but I can't shake this experience, and I need to tell someone who might understand or have gone through something similar. This happened just last month, in October. Me and 3 buddies, Chris, Mike, and Dave, decided to take one last camping trip before winter hit Colorado hard. We chose the San Juan Mountains near South Fork, a spot we'd been to a couple times before. Nothing fancy or overcrowded, just a small clearing about 4 miles from the nearest access road, big enough for our 2 tents and a fire ring, perfect for a weekend away from civilization. We hiked in Friday afternoon, joking and catching up. It was cold but manageable, probably in the low 40s, and the trees were that perfect mix of green pines and golden aspens, the kind of scenery that reminds you why you put up with hauling a 30-pound pack uphill for miles. We reached our spot around 3 in the afternoon and set up camp quickly. Chris and I shared one tent, Mike and Dave took the other. We gathered firewood, filtered some water from the nearby creek and started dinner. Just freeze-dried meals heated up on our portable stoves, but after the hike, it tasted amazing. We cracked open some beers we'd packed in, worth the extra weight, and settled around the fire as darkness fell. That's when I first noticed how quiet it was. I mean, we'd been there before, but something felt different this time. Usually you hear birds, small animals rustling in the underbrush, the wind in the trees. But that evening it was just still, like the forest was holding its breath. I remember thinking it was odd, but didn't mention it to the guys. Should have taken that as the first warning. We were swapping stories and planning the next day's hike when we heard it. The unmistakable sound of sticks breaking behind our tents, maybe 30 or 40 feet into the tree line. Mike said something about deer, which made sense. We'd seen plenty of deer sign on our hike in. But then it happened again, louder, and again. Whatever was moving out there was big and not particularly concerned about being quiet. Probably an elk, Dave suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. I grabbed my heavy-duty flashlight, one of those tactical ones that could probably blind someone temporarily, and shined it toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness between the trees, and that's when my blood ran cold. 2 eyes reflected back at me. Orange, not the green or white you'd expect from a deer or elk, and they were high up, at least 7 feet off the ground. "You guys seeing this?" I whispered. Before anyone could answer, we heard breathing. Not like a person breathing, or even a large animal panting. This was deep, heavy, rhythmic, like something with lungs twice the size of mine. I swung the flashlight back toward the sound, and for just a second, less than a heartbeat, I caught a glimpse of something. It was massive, standing upright between 2 pines. It had long, dark hair covering its body, not fur like a bear, hair, and it was tall, taller than any human I've ever seen. The light only caught it for a moment before it stepped back into deeper shadows, but that image is burned into my memory. Wide shoulders, long arms, standing on 2 legs. "What the fuck was that?" Chris hissed, his voice tight with fear. "Bear," Mike suggested, but we all knew better. Bears don't stand like that. They don't have eyes that reflect orange, and they don't move the way this thing moved, deliberate, almost human-like. We added more wood to the fire, making it as bright as possible. Nobody said the word that was on all our minds. It seemed too ridiculous, too impossible, but we were all thinking it. For the next hour, we sat in tense silence, listening as the thing circled our campsite. It never came closer than about 40 feet, staying just beyond where our firelight reached. But it was there, moving deliberately around us, making sure we knew it was watching. Occasionally, it would make these low grunts that seemed to rumble through the cold air. Not aggressive exactly, but communicative, like it was talking to itself, or maybe to us. Around 11, small rocks started landing near our fire ring. Not thrown hard enough to hit us, just tossed in our direction, like it was trying to get our attention or test our reactions. "We should leave," Dave said, his voice barely audible. Mike shook his head. "It's 4 miles back to the truck, through those trees, in the dark. No way." He was right. Whatever was out there, hiking through pitch-black forest would make us more vulnerable, not less. At midnight, just as we were discussing whether to take shifts sleeping, it happened. A howl tore through the silence, starting low and rising to a pitch that made the hair on my neck stand up. It wasn't a wolf, it wasn't a coyote, it wasn't anything I've ever heard before or since. It ended in a series of rough grunts that seemed to vibrate in my chest. "Jesus Christ," Chris whispered, his face pale in the firelight. I aimed my flashlight in the direction of the sound, and this time it didn't retreat fast enough. The beam caught it square on, maybe 35 feet away. For 3 or 4 seconds, I saw it clearly. It was at least 8 feet tall, broad shoulders covered in dark brown, almost black hair that hung down its back and arms. The face, God, the face, not quite human, not quite ape, a flat, wide nose, a heavy brow, and those eyes reflecting orange in my light. It raised one massive arm as if to shield its eyes from the brightness, and I saw its hand, huge, with fingers longer than mine, ending in thick, dark nails. Then it was gone, melting back into the trees with surprising grace for something so large. None of us slept that night. We kept the fire roaring, using up almost all our firewood. We heard it pacing around us until dawn, breaking sticks, breathing that deep, heavy breath, and occasionally knocking pieces of wood together. That's something I've since read about, wood knocking. Apparently it's a thing these creatures do. I didn't know that then, I just knew it was terrifying. Only when the sky began to lighten did the forest return to normal. Birds started singing again. The oppressive feeling of being watched gradually lifted. By the time the sun was fully up, it felt almost like nothing had happened, like we'd shared some collective nightmare. Almost, but not quite. Because when we finally felt safe enough to move around our campsite, we found the tracks. They were in the soft dirt near the edge of our clearing. Footprints, not boot prints, not bare paws. Footprints, wider and longer than my size, 11 hiking boots. The toes were clearly defined, 5 of them, spread wide, with what looked like claw marks at the tips. The impression was deep. Whatever made them was heavy. We took pictures, though none of us mentioned why. Saying it out loud still seemed ridiculous, but we all knew. We packed up in record time, barely speaking. The hike back to the truck was tense. All of us constantly looking over our shoulders, jumping at every sound. We half expected to see it again in daylight, but there was nothing. Just the forest, beautiful and innocent in the morning sun. It wasn't until we were driving away, the silence in the truck almost suffocating, that Mike finally said it. That was a Sasquatch. None of us laughed, none of us disagreed. I've always been skeptical about Bigfoot stories. Always thought they were just misidentified bears or people's overactive imaginations. Now, I don't know what to think. I know what I saw. I know what we all experienced. Those eyes, that howl, those footprints, the way it moved around us all night, intelligent and deliberate. It's been weeks, and I still wake up hearing that breathing, seeing those orange eyes reflecting in the darkness. I've tried researching, looking for similar experiences in that area. There are a few scattered reports, nothing conclusive. The San Juan Mountains are remote, largely untouched. Perfect habitat for something that doesn't want to be found. The four of us have barely talked about it since. When we do, it's in this weird, detached way. Like we're discussing a movie we saw, rather than something we lived through. I think it's easier that way. Easier than admitting that everything we thought we knew about what exists in our world might be wrong. I don't know if I'll ever go back to those mountains. Part of me is terrified at the thought, but another part wants to understand, wants answers, wants to know what was watching us that night, and why it let us leave. I'm not asking anyone to believe me. I probably wouldn't if I were reading this instead of living it. All I know is that something was out there in the San Juan Mountains. Something intelligent, something massive, something that doesn't appear in any biology textbook. And sometimes when I'm falling asleep, I swear I can hear wood knocking in the distance. Story 5. I've been putting off sharing this for a long time, but I need to get it off my chest. I still get chills thinking about what happened to us that night in the woods. I've tried to make sense of it for years, but I can't. And maybe someone here has experienced something similar. This happened in September of 2020, during that weird COVID period, when getting outdoors was one of the few normal things we could still do. My buddy Ryan and I decided to go camping in Marion County near the Pearl River. We're both into foraging, and we wanted to dig some ginseng roots. They grow wild in those parts, and if you know what you're looking for, you can make a decent bit of money selling them. We packed light, just a small 2-person tent, our digging tools, some food, and basic camping gear. It was supposed to be an easy overnight trip. We'd done this dozens of times before in those same woods. Nothing felt different when we arrived around noon that day. We found a decent spot to set up camp near the base of a cliff line. It was a good location, flat ground for the tent, protected on one side by the cliff wall, with a clearing perfect for a fire pit. The trees weren't too dense right around our camp, but about 20 yards out, the forest got thicker. I remember thinking how perfect it was, because we could see a good distance from our camp in most directions. The day went by without anything unusual. We hiked a few miles, found some decent ginseng patches, and dug up enough roots to make the trip worthwhile. We were joking around, talking about how we should do this more often, getting away from all the pandemic craziness. By the time we got back to camp, the sun was setting. We got a fire going, cooked some beans and hot dogs on a small camping stove, and cracked open a couple of beers. Everything was completely normal. Around 10 or 11, we decided to turn in. The fire was dying down to embers, but we weren't worried about it. The night wasn't particularly cold, and we had good sleeping bags. I fell asleep pretty quickly. I don't know exactly what time it was when I woke up, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning, but something had pulled me from a deep sleep. At first, I thought it was Ryan moving around, but when I looked over, I could see he was also awake, completely still, staring at the tent ceiling. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, I heard it myself. It was a sound like a massive owl hooting, but wrong somehow, too deep, too resonant. It echoed through the trees, coming from somewhere beyond the perimeter of our camp. The sound hung in the air for a moment, and then stopped. "What the hell was that?" I whispered back. Ryan shook his head. "I don't know. Maybe some kind of owl." We lay there in silence, listening. For about 5 minutes, nothing happened. I was starting to think it was just a weird bird, maybe a great horned owl or something, when we heard it again. Only this time, the hooting changed halfway through. It morphed into this low, rumbling growl that seemed to roll right into a howl. It wasn't like a wolf or a coyote. I've heard plenty of those. This was different. It had a quality to it that made the hair on my arms stand up. Ryan sat up. "That's not a fucking owl." We both scrambled for our flashlights and unzipped the tent. The fire was almost completely out, just a few glowing embers casting a dim red light on the immediate area around the fire pit. We shined our lights into the trees, but couldn't see anything. Then we heard movement. Not just twigs snapping, but the sound of something big moving through the underbrush. There was a violent shaking of branches, not like when a squirrel or raccoon climbs a tree, but like something was physically grabbing and shaking entire saplings. I was about to suggest we pack up and get the hell out of there when something flew through the air and landed with a thud about 10 feet from our tent. When I pointed my flashlight at it, I realized it was a small tree, not a branch, but an entire sapling, roots and all, freshly pulled from the ground. It was maybe 6 feet tall with a trunk about as thick as my wrist. "Holy shit," Ryan whispered. "What the fuck could do that?" I didn't have an answer. My mind was racing through possibilities. Bear, mountain lion, feral hogs, but none of them made sense. Bears don't typically pull up trees and throw them. Mountain lions don't make those kinds of sounds. And hogs, while destructive, don't behave like this. Ryan grabbed some wood we had stacked nearby and started building the fire back up. It seemed like the right move. Whatever was out there, having light and fire felt safer than darkness. As the flames grew higher, the woods around us went quiet. The strange sounds stopped. The tree shaking stopped. For about 45 minutes, while our fire burned bright, there was nothing but normal nighttime forest sounds. We were both wide awake now, sitting by the fire, backs to each other so we could watch in all directions. Neither of us said much. What was there to say? We were both freaked out, trying to process what was happening. Eventually, the fire started to die down again. We had a limited supply of wood, and neither of us wanted to venture too far from camp to gather more. As the flames diminished, the sounds returned. First, the hooting, then the growl howl, then tree shaking, but closer this time. Whatever it was, it seemed to be circling our camp, staying just beyond where our light reached. We heard heavy footsteps, not like a person walking, but heavier, more deliberate. Crack, pause, crack, pause, each step breaking sticks and crushing leaves. Then another sapling came flying into our camp, landing even closer to our tent than the first one. This time, there were clumps of dirt still clinging to the roots, as if it had just been yanked straight out of the ground. Ryan threw more wood on the fire, and once again, as the flames grew, the sounds retreated. We could still hear whatever it was moving around in the distance, but it seemed to stay back when the fire was bright. We quickly realized the pattern. Fire bright, creature stays away. Fire dims, creature approaches. We started rationing our wood, adding just enough to keep the flames at a decent height without burning through our supply too quickly. For the next several hours, this bizarre standoff continued. The fire would start to die. The creature would return with its terrible sounds and tree throwing. We'd build the fire back up. It would retreat. Neither of us slept. We just sat there, feeding the fire, listening to whatever was stalking us from the darkness. Around 4 in the morning, we ran out of our stockpile of wood. The fire was starting to dim again, and we knew we'd have to venture a bit from camp to gather more. We decided to go together. No way either of us was going alone. And we grabbed our flashlights and a hatchet, the only weapon we had. We moved maybe 15 yards from camp, frantically gathering whatever branches and sticks we could find. The whole time, we could hear movement in the trees ahead of us, just beyond our flashlight beams. Something big was pacing back and forth, watching us. I swear, I caught a glimpse of something tall, moving between 2 trees, but it was so quick, I couldn't be sure what I saw. We hurried back to camp with our armfuls of wood and built the fire back up. This pattern continued until the first light of dawn started to creep over the horizon. As the sky lightened, the woods around us finally went silent. Whatever had been stalking us all night was gone, or at least it had stopped making itself known. When full daylight arrived, we were exhausted, but too wired to sleep. We decided to investigate our surroundings. What we found still haunts me. Around our camp, in a rough circle about 30 to 40 yards out, were small trees and saplings, at least a dozen of them, broken clean off or pulled up entirely, roots and all. Some had been thrown toward our camp. Others were just snapped and left where they fell. These weren't tiny saplings either. They were trees with trunks the diameter of a broom handle or bigger. Out of curiosity and disbelief, Ryan and I tried to pull up a similar-sized sapling ourselves. We both grabbed it and pulled with all our strength. It didn't budge, not even a little. We tried another one, same result. Whatever had been uprooting these trees and throwing them at us had strength that vastly exceeded what two grown men could muster together. We also found large, depressed areas in the leaf litter, not distinct footprints, but places where something heavy had stepped and compressed the forest floor. They were spaced about 4 to 5 feet apart in some areas, forming what looked like a path circling our camp. We packed up immediately and got the hell out of there. The entire hike back to our car, I kept looking over my shoulder, feeling like we were being watched. We didn't say much on the drive home. What was there to say? We'd experienced something neither of us could explain. I've gone over that night countless times in my head. I've researched every animal native to Mississippi. Nothing fits. No known animal makes that sound. No known animal has the strength to pull up trees like that and the behavior to throw them. And the way it retreated from fire but returned when the flames died down, that shows intelligence, purpose. I swear on everything I care about that this story is true. I would take a polygraph test if someone asked me to. Whatever was in those woods that night wasn't normal. It wasn't a bear, wasn't a mountain lion, wasn't a group of people messing with us. It was something else. Something with incredible strength and a clear intention to intimidate us. I haven't been back to those woods since, and I never will. Ryan feels the same way. Some places are just better left alone. Story 6. I've been hesitating to share this for a long time. 31 years to be exact. It's not that I didn't want to talk about it, but rather that I couldn't find the words to describe what I saw that night without sounding completely insane. But after all these years, I still wake up sometimes in a cold sweat. The image burned into my memory as clear as if it happened yesterday. It was mid-October 1992. I was 27, working as a sound engineer at the time. I'd been in New York City for a few days, doing some freelance work at a small recording studio in Manhattan. The job wrapped up late, around 11 at night, and I was supposed to be back in Manchester for another gig the next afternoon. I figured I'd just power through the drive home instead of spending money on another night in a hotel. The first couple hours on the road were fine. I had the radio going, thermos of coffee, windows cracked a bit to keep the cool air hitting my face. I wasn't even that tired. I remember checking my watch as I crossed into Vermont. It was just after 1 in the morning. The traffic had thinned out to almost nothing by then. Once I got off the main highway and onto Route 7, I think I passed maybe 2 other cars in the span of 40 minutes. It was one of those pitch-black autumn nights that you only get in rural areas. No moon, just stars overhead, and the kind of darkness that seems to swallow your headlights after about 20 feet. I've always loved that part of Vermont, especially in the fall, but there's something about those roads at night that feels different, like you're driving through another world entirely. I was somewhere near Glastonbury, I think. This part of Route 7 winds through these patches of dense forest, and there's this stretch where you climb a gradual hill before the road straightens out again. It was between 2 and 3 in the morning, and I hadn't seen another car for at least half an hour. I remember adjusting the heat because the temperature had dropped, and I was starting to feel a bit of a chill. I was approaching the top of this rise, probably doing about 50 miles per hour. My high beams were on, carving this tunnel of light through the absolute darkness. The trees on either side of the road were just black silhouettes against the slightly less black sky, and that's when I saw it. At first, it was just movement at the very edge of my headlight's reach, something dark crossing from the right side of the road to the left. My initial thought was deer. They're everywhere up there, and I'd had a few close calls before, but as I got closer, I realized this wasn't moving like a deer at all. It was walking on 2 legs. I immediately thought it might be some drunk guy stumbling across the road. which would have been weird enough at that hour in the middle of nowhere, but as my car ate up the distance between us, I could see that whatever this was, it was way too big to be a person. The proportions were all wrong. My next thought was that it might be a bear walking upright. I've seen black bears in Vermont before, and they sometimes stand on their hind legs. But this thing's movement was different, fluid, deliberate. It was walking, not lumbering. Then I wondered if it might be a moose. The size would have been right, but the shape was completely wrong. No antlers, and the way it moved was nothing like the awkward gait of a moose. Whatever this was, it was tall, easily 7 or 8 feet, broad shoulders, long arms, and it was moving across the road with purpose, like it had somewhere to be. The whole sighting couldn't have lasted more than 3 or 4 seconds, but time seemed to stretch in that moment. I remember noticing how its legs bent, how its arms swung, how its head was set directly on those massive shoulders without much of a neck. I'm not ashamed to admit that I panicked. I hit the brakes, hard, and instinctively cut the wheel to the left, away from whatever was crossing the road. It was a stupid reaction. My tires screeched against the asphalt, and I felt the back end of my car start to swing out. The headlights swept across the road, briefly illuminating the tree line, and for just a split second, I caught another glimpse of the figure as it disappeared into the woods. My car did a complete 180 and ended up facing back the way I'd come, half on the shoulder of the road. By some miracle, I didn't hit anything or go into a ditch. The engine had stalled, and in the sudden silence, all I could hear was my own breathing and the tick-tick-tick of the cooling engine. I sat there for what felt like forever, knuckles white on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the spot where I'd seen the figure enter the woods. My heart was hammering in my chest. I kept waiting for whatever it was to emerge from the trees again, maybe approach the car. But there was nothing, just darkness and silence. After a couple of minutes, I managed to pull myself together enough to restart the car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key. I remember thinking I should get out, look around, maybe try to find tracks or something. But there was no way in hell I was getting out of that car. Not on that road, not in that darkness, not with whatever I'd just seen, potentially watching me from the trees. I turned the car around and continued driving. But now I was going maybe 30 miles per hour, constantly scanning the road ahead and the tree line on either side. Every shadow looked like it could be that figure again. Every movement in my peripheral vision made me flinch. The rational part of my brain was working overtime, trying to explain what I'd seen. Maybe it was just a person, and the darkness and my tired eyes had distorted their size and shape. Maybe it was a bear, and the way my headlights hit it created some weird optical illusion. Maybe I'd fallen asleep at the wheel for a second and dreamed the whole thing up, but I know I wasn't asleep. And I know what I saw wasn't a person, or a bear, or a moose, or any other animal I've ever encountered in Vermont or anywhere else. It took me another hour and a half to get home, a drive that should have taken 45 minutes. I kept the radio off and the windows up the rest of the way. I didn't stop, not even when I needed to use the bathroom so badly my bladder felt like it was going to burst. I just wanted to get home, get inside, lock the doors. When I finally made it to my apartment, I sat in my car in the parking lot for a while, just staring at nothing. The eastern sky was just starting to lighten a bit. I remember thinking how strange it was that the world looked so normal, so ordinary, when just hours before I'd seen something that defied explanation. I didn't tell anyone about it right away. Who would I tell? What would I say? Hey, I think I saw Bigfoot crossing Route 7 last night. I'd sound like a lunatic, so I kept it to myself, tried to rationalize it, tried to convince myself I'd been tired and my mind had played tricks on me. But I know what I saw. The image is still crystal clear in my mind all these years later. That massive silhouette moving with such strange, deliberate grace across the road. The way it disappeared into the trees without breaking stride, like it belonged there in a way I never would. I've looked into local folklore since then. Turns out Bennington County has a history of strange sightings. There's even a term for it, the Bennington Triangle. People have reported unexplained disappearances, weird lights, and yes, large unidentifiable creatures in those woods for decades. I don't know if what I saw that night is connected to any of that, but it makes me wonder. I've driven that stretch of Route 7 many times since then, but always in daylight. I've pulled over near where I think it happened, walked the edge of the woods, looking for, I don't know what, some sign, some confirmation that what I saw was real. I've never found anything. The few times I've tried to tell this story to friends, I can see the skepticism in their eyes. They think I'm exaggerating or misremembering, or that I was just exhausted and my mind was playing tricks on me. Maybe they're right. Sometimes I almost convince myself they are, but then I'll be driving somewhere at night and my headlights will catch something moving at the edge of the darkness. And that feeling comes rushing back, that absolute certainty that what I saw on Route 7 that night wasn't something that should exist in our world. That mixture of awe and terror that froze me in place and has never completely left me since. I don't expect anyone to believe me. Hell, half the time I try not to believe myself. But I know what I saw crossing that road in the darkness, and whatever it wasn't human, and it wasn't any animal I've ever seen before or since. Sometimes I wonder if it's still out there, moving through those dense Vermont forests under the cover of night, and sometimes, on the edge of sleep, I imagine it remembers me too, the human who almost hit it with his car on that pitch-black October night in 1992. Story 7. I've been debating whether to share this for 21 years now. I'm not looking for anyone to believe me. Honestly, I don't care if you do. I just need to get this off my chest because it still haunts me. I wake up sweating some nights when there's a storm, thinking I'm back there. This happened in July 2002. My wife Laura and I took our kids, Emma, 11, Jack, 9, camping with my brother Steve and his 2 kids, Megan, 12, and Tyler, 8. We were all outdoor people, did camping trips at least 3 or 4 times every summer since the kids were little. This was supposed to be another normal family trip. We chose Rifle Mountain Park in Garfield County, Colorado. Beautiful place. We'd been there once before, but this time we hiked a bit deeper in, following this old trail that wasn't on the newer maps. I wanted to find a spot where we could fish in the creek and have some privacy. After about 40 minutes of hiking, we found this perfect clearing maybe 50 yards from a creek. It was surrounded by these huge pine and spruce trees, the kind that block out most of the sunlight even during the day. We set up our big 8-person tent, one of those cabin-style Coleman tents that can fit 2 families if you don't mind being cozy. The day was great. Kids played in the creek. We caught a few small trout, built a fire, cooked dinner, normal camping stuff. Weather reports said there might be some rain, but nothing serious. Around 8:30 that evening, clouds started rolling in. The wind picked up. You know how mountain weather changes fast. By 9, we could hear thunder in the distance. I told everyone we should get everything secured and get inside the tent before it hit. We were just settling in, laying out sleeping bags, when everything changed. The first thing was the smell. My God, the smell. It hit all of us at once, like roadkill that's been sitting in the summer heat for days, mixed with garbage and something else I can't even describe. It was so intense, it made my eyes water immediately. Laura started gagging. The kids covered their noses and looked at us with these wide, panicked eyes. "What is that?" Steve whispered, and I remember thinking it was weird he was whispering. Before I could answer, we heard it. Something was moving through the trees toward us, not like a deer or even a bear. This was heavy, so heavy the ground seemed to vibrate slightly with each step. Branches were snapping, not little twigs, but the sound of thick branches breaking under tremendous weight. The rain had just started coming down hard on the tent, but somehow we could still hear this thing breathing. Deep, ragged breaths punctuated by this low growl that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard in these mountains. And I'd heard plenty of bears, mountain lions, you name it. The kids huddled together in the middle of the tent. Emma was crying silently, tears streaming down her face. Jack was frozen, just staring at the tent wall like he could see through it. Laura grabbed my arm so tight I had bruises the next day. The footsteps got closer, slower, more deliberate, like whatever it was knew exactly where we were and was taking its time. The rain was pouring now, thunder cracking overhead, but I swear the footsteps were louder than the storm. Then it stopped, right outside our tent, maybe 10 feet away. For a few seconds, there was nothing but the sound of the rain and our own terrified breathing. Then it let out a scream that I still hear in my nightmares. It wasn't like anything I've ever heard before or since. Not a bear roar, not a mountain lion, not a wolf. It was deep, guttural, but also somehow human-like. Powerful enough that I felt it in my chest. The whole tent vibrated with it. Lightning flashed, and that's when we saw it. The silhouette against the tent fabric, this massive shape towering over our tent. The lightning kept flashing, and with each flash, we could see more details of this thing through the tent material. It had to be at least 9 feet tall. The arms, Jesus, the arms hung down so low, thick and covered in what looked like hair or fur. Rain was dripping off it. When lightning flashed again, I realized the reason parts of the tent kept going dark wasn't shadows. It was because this thing was so tall, it was blocking the lightning flashes from above. I don't know what came over me. Some primal instinct to protect my family, I guess. Before I even realized what I was doing, I was unzipping the tent door. "James, no!" Laura hissed, grabbing at my shirt, but I was already halfway out. The rain hit me like a wall of cold water. The wind was howling through the trees. I crawled out and stood up slowly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it would burst. And there it was, not 10 feet away, partially hidden by the downpour and the darkness, but unmistakable. This massive figure standing between 2 pine trees. It was hunched slightly, those impossibly long arms hanging down. The smell was overwhelming. I nearly vomited right there. Its breathing was visible even in the rain, chest expanding, contracting with each deep breath. Lightning flashed again, and I saw it clearly for a split second. Dark, matted hair covered its entire body. Its face, God, its face was like a nightmare version of something almost human, but not quite. Deep-set eyes reflected the lightning like an animal's. It had this heavy brow ridge and a wide, flat nose. It let out another low growl, and I swear I could feel the vibration of it in my bones. I backed up slowly toward the tent entrance, never taking my eyes off it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the tent zipper. I fumbled my way back inside and zipped it shut, as if a thin layer of nylon would protect us from whatever that thing was. "What is it?" Steve whispered, his face completely drained of color. I couldn't speak. I just positioned myself against the tent entrance, my back to the zipper, as if my body weight could somehow keep that monster out if it decided to come in. "James, what did you see?" Laura's voice was trembling. "Don't make noise," was all I could manage to say. For the next several hours, though it felt like days, that thing circled our tent. Sometimes it would move away, and we'd hear it thrashing through the underbrush maybe 50 yards off. Then it would come back, so close we could hear it breathing and smell that putrid stench seeping through the tent fabric. The kids were silent, too terrified to even cry. Megan had her hands clamped over Tyler's mouth at one point when he started whimpering. We all just sat there, huddled together in the middle of the tent, listening to this thing prowl around us. Around 3 in the morning, the storm finally started to let up. The creature's movements seemed to get farther away. By 4, we couldn't hear it anymore, but none of us moved or spoke until the first grey light of dawn filtered through the trees. "We're leaving. Now," I said, my voice hoarse from hours of silence and fear. "Pack only what you need. Leave the rest." Nobody argued. We packed in record time, leaving behind cooking gear, extra clothes, even some of the sleeping bags. The kids were silent, mechanically following instructions. We were on the trail by 5:30, practically jogging back toward the parking area. I kept looking over my shoulder the whole way, half expecting to see that thing following us. The woods felt different in the daylight, almost like nothing had happened, like it had all been some shared hallucination. But the missing gear, our mud-covered clothes, and the hollow, haunted look in everyone's eyes told me it was real. When we got to the cars, Steve pulled me aside while Laura got the kids settled. "What the hell was that, James?" he asked, his voice still shaky. I shook my head. "I don't know." But I did know. I just couldn't say it out loud then. Couldn't admit what I'd seen. It took me years to finally tell Laura and Steve the truth, that what I saw that night was what people call Bigfoot, 9 feet tall at least. Massive shoulders, arms that hung down to its knees, covered in dark, wet hair, and those eyes, intelligent, angry, wild. None of us ever went back to that part of Rifle Mountain. Steve and I took the kids camping again eventually, but always in developed campgrounds with other people nearby. Laura never went camping again. Our kids are adults now. Emma, Jack, and Megan still talk about it sometimes when we get together for holidays. Tyler refuses to discuss it at all. He won't even go hiking anymore. I've spent countless hours researching similar encounters since then, looking for explanations, reading about other people's experiences. Some of them are so similar to ours, it makes my skin crawl. I don't know what we encountered that night. I don't know why it didn't attack us when it clearly could have. Sometimes I think it was just curious. Other times, I wonder if it was warning us to get out of its territory. All I know is that something found us in those woods that night. Something that shouldn't exist according to science. Something that walked on 2 legs, screamed with a voice that could overpower thunder, and left me questioning everything I thought I knew about the world. I still wake up some nights when storms roll in, convinced I can hear those heavy footsteps circling my house, and that smell. I swear sometimes I catch a whiff of it, even in the middle of the city, and my heart nearly stops. 21 years later, and I'm still looking over my shoulder when I hear branches breaking in the woods. Story 8. I still remember that day in June of '81 like it was yesterday, even though it's been over 40 years now. I was 12 years old, just a kid living on my family's property outside of town in New South Wales. Me and my best mate Shane were doing what we always did, mucking about in the bush, looking for adventure. My family's property sat right on the banks of Cooma Creek, about 2 kilometers north of town. It was a beautiful place to grow up. All that space to run around, trees to climb, places to explore, but something had been off for a few weeks before it happened. Dad had found 3 of our horses with these deep cuts along their sides and backs. Not like they'd caught themselves on a fence or anything. These were deliberate slashes. Our old mare Bonnie actually died from her injuries. Dad figured it might be some local kids being cruel, or maybe a wild dog, though the cuts seemed too precise for an animal. Mum thought it might be someone with a grudge against our family, but nobody could figure out who'd do such a thing or why. Anyway, that Saturday morning was perfect weather, not too hot, clear blue sky. Shane had come over to stay the night before, and after breakfast, we decided to head out exploring. We packed some sandwiches and fizzy drinks in my backpack, and Mum told us not to go too far and be back before dark. We were hiking along this ridge that runs behind our property, about half a kilometer from the house. You could see down to Cooma Creek from there, all winding through the trees. We'd been out for maybe 2 hours, just talking about school and cricket and normal kid stuff. Shane was telling me about this new bike his parents promised him for Christmas when we both stopped dead in our tracks. About 30 meters down the hill, next to this massive eucalyptus tree, was something. At first, my brain couldn't make sense of what I was seeing. It was this huge shape, covered in this reddish-brown hair or fur. For a split second, I thought it might be a lost cow or something, but it was standing on 2 legs. I remember grabbing Shane's arm so hard he winced. We both froze, not making a sound. The thing was massive, taller than my dad, who's 6 feet and much, much broader. It had this weird proportioned body, like its head sat directly on its shoulders with barely any neck at all. The hair was this unusual reddish-brown color, not like any animal I'd ever seen around our property. "What the fuck is that?" Shane whispered, his voice barely audible. I couldn't answer. My mouth had gone completely dry. We stood there for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. The creature was doing something with its hands. Yes, hands, not paws, near the base of the tree. It seemed to be digging or searching for something. Then it stopped. I swear I could feel the exact moment it sensed us watching. There was this tree branch that was blocking part of its face, right where its eyes would be. The branch was at least 2 meters off the ground, which gives you an idea of how tall this thing was. It slowly straightened up and then, I'll never forget this as long as I live, it bent slightly to look under the branch, directly at us. I don't remember deciding to run. 1 second we were standing there, and the next we were sprinting back toward my house, crashing through the bush like our lives depended on it. I could hear Shane breathing hard beside me, and I was too terrified to even look back. The weird thing is, I never heard it chasing us. But as we were running, Shane yelled, "It's coming!" He must have looked back. That made me run even faster, my heart feeling like it was going to explode out of my chest. We burst out of the tree line and ran across our back paddock toward the house. My mum was hanging laundry and dropped her basket when she saw us tearing across the yard, faces white as sheets. "What happened? Are you boys all right?" she kept asking, but I couldn't speak. My legs just gave out, and I sat down hard on the back step trying to catch my breath. Shane was babbling, telling Mum we'd seen something big in the woods. Dad came out when he heard the commotion, and Shane told them what we'd seen. I remember Dad's face changing as Shane described it, the massive height, the reddish-brown hair, the way it bent to look at us under the branch. Dad kept looking at me for confirmation, but I still couldn't speak properly. I just nodded. "And then it ran down the hill after us," Shane said, his voice breaking. "It was so fast, like impossibly fast for something that big. It moved like it knew every rock and tree root without looking." Dad grabbed his rifle and called our neighbor, Mr. Patterson, who came over with his 2 sons. They all went out to the ridge where we'd seen it, but they came back a few hours later, saying they hadn't found anything except some broken branches and what might have been large footprints, but the ground was too hard and dry to tell for sure. I remember Mum made me hot chocolate and tried to get me to talk about it, but I couldn't. I wasn't crying or anything. I was just empty, like my brain had short-circuited. I went to bed, even though it was only 4 in the afternoon. Mum says I slept for almost 2 hours straight, and when I woke up, I had this pounding headache. Shane's parents came to pick him up that evening. His dad thought we'd seen a particularly large kangaroo, or maybe a feral pig, and had let our imaginations run wild. I could tell even Shane was starting to doubt what we'd seen, trying to make sense of it in a way that wouldn't scare him anymore. But I knew what I saw. It wasn't a kangaroo or a pig or a person in a costume. The way it moved was wrong, too fluid for something that size, and those hands, they weren't animal paws. They were like massive human hands, but the proportions were off. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing noises outside my window, branches scraping, leaves rustling. Dad checked the property twice with his flashlight, but said it was just the wind. I'm not sure I believed him. A week later, we found another horse injured. Deeper cuts this time, and in a pattern that made no sense. Dad put it down to wild dogs again, but I saw him looking toward the ridge more often after that, and he installed extra lights around the stables. For months afterward, I refused to go anywhere near that part of our property. I'd make excuses, say I was sick, anything to avoid going back there. Shane and I didn't talk about it much after that first day. It was like we had this unspoken agreement not to bring it up. But sometimes, when we were alone, he'd ask, "Do you still think about that thing?" And I'd just nod. School started back up after the winter holidays, and eventually the memory faded a bit. Not gone, just less immediate. But I never went exploring in those woods alone again. Shane and I drifted apart in high school. His family moved to Sydney when we were 15, and we lost touch. I've sometimes wondered if he still remembers that day as clearly as I do. I've researched it over the years. Yowies, they call them here, Australia's version of Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Most people treat them as jokes or campfire stories, but there are reports from all over, Queensland, the Blue Mountains, even Tasmania. People describing similar things, tall, hairy creatures with reddish or dark brown fur, moving with incredible speed through terrain that would slow a human to a crawl. I've never told many people about what happened. My wife knows, and I think she believes me, though she's never said so directly. My kids think it's just a scary story Dad tells sometimes. But every June I remember, and every time I hear about someone finding livestock mysteriously injured or killed, or hikers going missing in the bush, I wonder. The thing that still haunts me most isn't just what we saw, it's what happened afterward. The silence. Dad and Mr. Patterson found where we'd been standing on the ridge. They found the big eucalyptus tree we described, but they never found any conclusive evidence of the creature. No clear footprints, no hair samples, nothing that couldn't be explained away. But they did find something they never told us about until years later. The eucalyptus tree, the one the creature had been standing next to, had these deep gouges in the trunk, not like claw marks from a koala or scratches from a branch. These were deliberate. 5 parallel lines, deeply cut into the bark, about 2 meters up the trunk. Too high and too precise for any known animal in the area to make. Dad took photos, but never showed them to anyone outside the family. He was worried about attracting attention to our property. Nutters and thrill seekers, he called them. The photos are probably still in the old family album at my parents' house. Sometimes I think about reaching out to Shane, seeing if he remembers it the same way I do. If the passing years have changed his memory, or if he's convinced himself it was something else. But part of me doesn't want to know. Part of me wants to keep that day exactly as I remember it. Terrifying, unexplainable, but real. I've been back to the property many times since then. My parents still live there, though they're getting on in years now. The ridge is still there. The eucalyptus tree is still there, though it's older and taller now. The gouges have long since grown over, but if you know where to look, you can still see the scars in the bark. And sometimes when I'm visiting and I step outside at night for a smoke, I look toward that ridge and wonder if it's still out there, if it's watching, if it remembers the 2 small boys who stumbled upon it that June day in '81. I don't know what we saw that day at Cooma Creek. I don't know if it was responsible for what happened to our horses. All I know is that it was real. It was massive, and when it looked at us from under that branch, I felt something I've never felt before or since, like I was prey, like I was being sized up by something that didn't just want to scare me away, but was deciding whether or not I was worth the trouble of catching. I still get goosebumps thinking about how quickly it moved down that steep hill. No human could have navigated that terrain at that speed. Whatever it was, it knew those woods better than we did, and sometimes in my darkest thoughts, I wonder if it's still there, still knowing those woods, still waiting. Story 9. I've been putting this off for too long, but I need to get it out there. Maybe someone else has seen something similar. This happened 3 summers ago when I was 19, and my brother Kyle was 17. We live in Monroe County, Mississippi, where there's a lot of farmland, woods, and not much else. Our family has a few acres with a small pond, and behind our property there's a large soybean field owned by Mr. Hargrove, an older guy who's been farming there since before we were born. That evening started like any other summer day. It was late August, muggy as hell, and the sun was just starting to set. Kyle and I had spent most of the day helping our dad fix the deck, and when we finished, we decided to take the 4-wheeler out for a ride before dinner. We did this all the time. There's a trail that runs along Mr. Hargrove's soybean field and then cuts through a stretch of woods that connects to a gravel road about 3 miles from our house. Mom shouted something about being back before dark, but we were already halfway down the driveway. The four-wheeler was an old Yamaha our dad bought second-hand a few years back. Nothing fancy, but reliable enough to get around the property and neighboring trails. Kyle drove while I sat behind him, holding onto the rack. The trail was rutted from recent rain, and Kyle was having fun splashing through muddy puddles as we followed along the edge of the soybean field. The beans were almost ready for harvest, tall and green, stretching out for acres. To our right was the tree line, thick with pines and hardwoods that grew denser as you went further in. It was about 7 in the evening, still light but getting dimmer, with that golden late summer light filtering through the trees. We were just shooting the shit, talking about Kyle's senior year that was about to start and my community college classes. Normal stuff. Nothing felt off or weird. The woods were making their usual evening sounds, cicadas screaming, birds calling, the occasional rustle in the underbrush. We came around a bend in the trail where it runs closest to the woods. Kyle slowed down a bit because there were some exposed roots crossing the path. That's when I saw it. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me. There was something standing just inside the tree line, partially hidden by a pine trunk, but clearly visible enough that I could make out its shape. It was Jesus, I still get chills thinking about it. It was enormous, taller than any person I've ever seen, 8 feet at least, maybe more. Kyle, stop, I said, squeezing his shoulder hard. He hit the brakes, and the four-wheeler jerked to a halt. What? I nodded toward the trees. Look. He turned his head, and I felt him go completely rigid. The thing was standing there, absolutely still, looking directly at us. Its body was covered in this coarse, patchy hair, not fur exactly, more like human hair but thicker and longer. But what really got me was the color. It wasn't brown or black like you'd expect from a bear or some other animal. It was white, not snow white, but an off-white, almost light gray color that stood out starkly against the dark trees behind it. We must have stared at each other for 5, maybe 10 seconds. I remember noticing how wide its shoulders were, like a linebacker but twice as broad. Its chest was massive, barrel-shaped, and its arms, God, its arms hung down almost to its knees. The proportions were all wrong for a human. The head sat directly on those huge shoulders, almost no neck visible. I couldn't see its face clearly at that distance and with the shadows, but I could make out deep-set eyes under a heavy brow ridge. The skin around its eyes and mouth was darker, a grayish color against the paleness of the rest. There was something both human and not human about that face. It had a nose, flat and wide, and a square jaw that jutted forward slightly. Kyle whispered, "What the fuck is that?" The moment he spoke, the creature shifted its weight. Kyle looked down for a second to reach for the gear shift, and in that split second, the thing had already started moving back into the trees. Its movement was fluid, nothing like a person in a costume would move. Then it stopped. It turned back toward us, and that's when it made the sound. I've heard all kinds of animals in these woods my whole life. Coyotes, bobcats, even the occasional panther. Nothing sounded like this. It started as a low rumble that I could almost feel in my chest, then rose to this deep, bellowing scream that echoed through the trees. It wasn't an animal sound, but it wasn't human either. It was primal and furious and terrifying, and then it charged. I've never felt fear like that in my life, pure instinctual terror that froze my blood. The thing crashed through the underbrush toward us, snapping branches and kicking up leaves. It moved fast, impossibly fast for something so big. "Go, go, go!" I was screaming, pounding Kyle's back with my fist. Kyle fumbled with the gear shift, the engine revving high as he popped the clutch. The four-wheeler jerked forward, the back tire spinning in the dirt before finding traction. We shot down the trail, the engine whining as Kyle pushed it to full throttle. I looked back over my shoulder, gripping the rack so hard my knuckles turned white. I couldn't see the creature anymore, but I could hear it, crashing through the brush parallel to the trail, those horrible screams cutting through the engine noise. It was following us. "It's still coming," I yelled into Kyle's ear. He hunched lower over the handlebars, pushing the four-wheeler faster than I'd ever felt it go before. The trail was bumpy as hell, and we were getting airborne over every little rise. My teeth were rattling, and I was sure we were going to crash, but that seemed better than whatever was behind us. We hit a straight stretch of trail, and Kyle opened it up even more. The four-wheeler was shaking violently at that speed on the uneven ground. Gradually, the sounds of pursuit began to fade. Either the thing had given up, or we'd outrun it. But Kyle didn't slow down. He kept that throttle maxed out until we burst out of the trail onto the gravel road that led back towards civilization. He finally cut the engine at the intersection with the main county road, about 2 miles from where we'd seen the thing. We sat there in silence, both of us breathing hard. I could feel Kyle's body trembling, or maybe it was mine, probably both. "Did you see that?" he finally asked, his voice cracking. "Yeah," I said. "I saw it." "What the hell was it?" I shook my head. "I don't know." We sat there for a while, trying to process what had happened. My hands were still shaking, and I had this cold sweat coating my skin despite the summer heat. Cars occasionally passed on the main road, people heading home for dinner, completely unaware of what we'd just experienced. "We need to tell Dad," Kyle said. I nodded, but I was already thinking about how it would sound. A giant white creature in the woods? Nobody would believe us. They'd think we were making it up, or that we'd seen a bear standing on its hind legs. But this wasn't a bear. Bears don't have that body shape, they don't have that color, and they sure as hell don't make sounds like what we heard. We rode home slowly, both of us scanning the woods on either side of the road. It was almost dark by the time we pulled into our driveway. Mom was standing on the porch, arms crossed, ready to lecture us about being late for dinner. One look at our faces, though, and her expression changed. "What happened? Are you boys okay?" We told them over dinner. Dad listened without interrupting, which wasn't like him. Mom kept saying it must have been a bear, but she didn't sound convinced. When we finished, Dad was quiet for a long moment. "Mr. Hargrove mentioned something to me last year," he finally said. "Said he'd been hearing strange noises from those woods at night. Screams that didn't sound like any animal he knew. Said his farmhands refused to work near that section of woods after dark." A chill ran through me. "Did he ever see anything?" Dad shook his head. "Not that he told me. But there've been stories around here for years, people seeing things they can't explain. The next day, Kyle and I went back to look for tracks. We took Dad's shotgun and stayed on the four-wheeler the whole time. We found where we'd stopped on the trail. The skid marks from our sudden takeoff were still visible in the dirt. The area where the creature had been standing was too covered in pine needles to show footprints, but there was disturbance in the underbrush where it had charged through, broken branches and trampled ferns. What really freaked me out was a pine tree at the edge of the woods. About 7 feet up, several branches were broken, not just bent, but snapped clean off, like something tall and powerful had pushed through them at a run. We never rode that trail again. I still live at home, helping out with the family business while I finish school, but I won't go near those woods, especially not at dusk. Kyle's away at college now, and when he comes home for breaks, we don't talk about what happened, not because we don't believe it anymore, but because it still scares the shit out of us. I've spent countless hours researching online, trying to find similar encounters. There are stories of Bigfoot sightings all over the country, but most describe brown or black creatures. This thing was different. Its color, its proportions, the way it moved. It was something else entirely. Sometimes I wake up in the middle of the night, my heart racing because I've dreamed about those eyes staring at us from the tree line. I wonder if it's still out there, moving through those Mississippi woods. I wonder if it's watching and waiting. I still don't know what we saw that day. I just know it was real, it was intelligent, and for whatever reason, it didn't want us there. And if you're ever riding through the backwoods of Monroe County as the sun starts to set, my advice is simple. Stay on the main roads, keep moving, and whatever you do, don't stop if you hear screaming in the trees. Story 10. This happened back in '89, and I still can't explain it. My girlfriend Melissa and I were both 24 at the time, young and stupid enough to think we were invincible. We'd been dating for about 2 years and loved outdoor adventures. We weren't expert campers by any means, but we'd been on enough weekend trips that we felt comfortable heading somewhere a bit more remote. We chose Tar Hollow State Forest in Ohio because we'd heard it was beautiful but not crowded like some of the more popular camping spots. It was late April, still pretty cool at night, but warm enough during the day that camping would be pleasant. The trees were just starting to get their leaves, and everything had that bright spring green color to it. We arrived Friday afternoon around 4 o'clock. The ranger station was about to close, but we managed to check in and get some basic directions. The guy working there seemed a bit surprised when we told him we wanted to backwoods camp rather than use one of the designated campgrounds. Not many folks go out there this time of year, he told us, circling an area on our map. Just make sure you're at least 200 feet from any trails or water sources. We thanked him and headed out, driving about 20 minutes down these increasingly narrow forest roads until we reached a small gravel parking area where we could leave the car. It was my old Honda Civic, nothing fancy but reliable. We grabbed our packs. We'd packed light with just a small 2-person tent, sleeping bags, some basic cooking gear, and enough food for the weekend. The hike in wasn't too bad, maybe 2 miles on a marked trail before we veered off into the woods. We found this perfect little clearing that seemed like it was made for camping. Flat ground, a natural windbreak of trees on one side, and far enough from the trail that we'd have total privacy. It took us about an hour to set up camp properly. I remember feeling so satisfied once we had the tent up and our little area organized. We spent the rest of the daylight hours gathering firewood and exploring the immediate area. There was a small stream about a 1/4 mile away where we filled our water bottles. The woods were peaceful, lots of birdsong, the occasional rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Nothing that seemed out of the ordinary. We cooked a simple dinner of instant noodles with some canned tuna mixed in, sitting by our small fire and talking about nothing important. The sky was clear, and as it got darker, the stars came out in that incredible way they do when you're far from city lights. It got cold quickly once the sun went down, so we were in our sleeping bags by 9:30 or 10. I remember falling asleep to the sound of the wind in the trees and the occasional hoot of an owl somewhere in the distance. It was exactly the kind of peaceful night we'd been hoping for. I'm not sure what time it was when I woke up. Had to be the middle of the night. That complete darkness that only happens hours after sunset. At first, I wasn't sure what had woken me. Melissa was asleep next to me, her breathing deep and regular. Then I heard it. Footsteps. Heavy, deliberate footsteps moving through the woods. At first, I thought maybe it was a deer or something, but these didn't sound like an animal on 4 legs. These were bipedal footsteps, the unmistakable sound of something walking on 2 feet. Step, pause, step, pause, slow and methodical, and they were coming directly toward our tent. I lay there, completely still, straining my ears. The steps continued, getting closer. Whatever it was big. Each footfall made this soft but heavy thud on the forest floor, pressing down on leaves and twigs. There was something about the rhythm that didn't seem human. It was too measured, too deliberate. I reached over and gently shook Melissa awake, putting my finger to my lips when she started to speak. Her eyes widened as she heard the footsteps too. We lay there, hardly breathing, as the steps continued to approach. They were maybe 30 feet from our tent when I decided I needed to do something. I had this small pouch of gravel I'd collected earlier to use as tent stakes, and I grabbed a handful. Moving as quietly as possible, I unzipped the tent just enough to throw the gravel in the direction of the sound. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. Whatever was out there stopped abruptly. Then, and this is the part that still gives me chills, it took several quick steps backward. Not like it was startled and ran away, but like it was tactically retreating. It backed up maybe 15 feet, then went completely silent. Melissa squeezed my hand so hard her nails dug into my palm. We sat there frozen, listening to the absolute silence of the woods. No crickets, no nightbirds, nothing, just complete stillness. Then it started moving again. The same heavy, deliberate footsteps resuming their approach toward our tent. "Jason," Melissa whispered, her voice barely audible. "What the fuck is that?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The footsteps kept coming, steady and purposeful. When they were about 20 feet away, I made a decision. "We need to go," I whispered. "Now." We didn't bother with shoes or proper clothes. We were wearing what we'd slept in, sweatpants and t-shirts. We grabbed our car keys, flashlight, and Melissa's purse, and unzipped the tent as quietly as possible on the side, facing away from the footsteps. We slipped out and immediately started running toward where I thought the trail was. I had the flashlight, but was afraid to turn it on, worried about drawing attention to ourselves. The moon provided just enough light to avoid running straight into trees, but we were stumbling over roots and underbrush. The moment we started running, the footsteps behind us quickened. Not to a run, but to a faster walk, like whatever it was knew exactly where we were going and wasn't in any hurry to catch us. We found the trail purely by luck and started moving faster. I finally risked turning on the flashlight, pointing it at the ground just enough to keep us from falling. The whole time, I could hear those footsteps behind us, keeping pace, but never quite catching up. It took us maybe 25 minutes to reach the car, though it felt like hours. I've never been so relieved to see that beat-up Honda in my life. We jumped in, locked the doors, and I started the engine with shaking hands. As we pulled away, I caught a glimpse of something in the rear-view mirror, just a darker shadow among the trees at the edge of the parking area. But it was tall, much taller than any person should be. We drove for about 15 minutes before finding a pull-off area next to the main road through the forest. We parked there, still too terrified to leave the forest entirely, but feeling safer with other cars occasionally passing by. Neither of us slept. We just sat there, watching the sun slowly rise, trying to make sense of what had happened. When morning finally came, we debated what to do. All our camping gear was still back at the site. My wallet was in my backpack, our food, everything. We couldn't just leave it all. Maybe it was just a park ranger checking on us, Melissa suggested, but she didn't sound convinced. At 3 in the morning, without announcing himself, and backing up like that when I threw the gravel? She didn't have an answer for that. Eventually, we decided to go back for our stuff in the daylight. We figured whatever it was would be gone by now, and we could quickly pack up and get out of there. The hike back to our campsite was tense, but everything looked different in the daylight. Birds were singing, squirrels were darting around, everything seemed normal. When we reached our clearing, the tent was exactly as we'd left it, untouched. Nothing was disturbed at all. We packed up quickly, barely speaking. I wanted to just grab our stuff and go, but Melissa suggested we at least try to enjoy part of our day, since everything seemed okay now. There was a trail near our campsite that supposedly led to a nice overlook, and it was only about a mile round trip. Against my better judgment, I agreed. We stashed our packed gear by a distinctive tree so we wouldn't have to carry it, planning to pick it up on our way back to the car. We'd hiked maybe half a mile when it happened. I was slightly ahead of Melissa on the narrow trail when something caught my eye off to the right. I stopped and turned my head slowly. About 30 yards away, moving through the trees, was a figure. It was tall, impossibly tall, maybe 7 or 8 feet at least. It was walking upright, completely bipedal, with a natural swinging gait. Its arms were long, hanging down almost to its knees, but they weren't dangling awkwardly. They swung naturally, like a person's would. The thing's body was covered in dark hair, a deep brown or black that blended with the shadows of the trees. The hair wasn't matted or tangled like you might expect from an animal. It was smooth, maybe 5 or 6 inches long all over its body. Its frame was lean but powerful looking, with broad shoulders tapering to a narrower waist. I couldn't make out its face clearly. It never turned directly toward me. But I could see the profile was flat, not protruding like a gorilla's or chimpanzee's. It moved with purpose and awareness, not like a wandering animal, but like something that knew exactly where it was going. I stood frozen, watching it move through the trees. It never looked at me, never acknowledged my presence in any way, but I had the overwhelming feeling that it knew exactly where I was, that it had known all along. "Jason?" Melissa's voice broke the spell. "What are you looking at?" By the time I raised my arm to point, the figure was gone, vanished among the trees as silently as it had appeared. "We need to leave, now." My voice didn't even sound like my own. To her credit, Melissa didn't question me. She must have seen something in my face that told her this was serious. We turned around, retrieved our gear, and practically jogged back to the car. I kept looking over my shoulder the entire way, half expecting to see that tall figure following us, but there was nothing. We never went back to Tar Hollow. We never went camping again, actually. Melissa and I broke up about a year later for unrelated reasons, but neither of us ever talked much about what happened that night. What could we say? That we were scared off by Bigfoot, that something not quite human had stalked us in the woods? All I know is that I'll never forget the sound of those footsteps. Deliberate, purposeful, intelligent. Something that walked upright but wasn't a human. Something that knew exactly where we were and was coming directly for us. I've spent years trying to rationalize it, but I can't. I know what I saw. I know what I heard, and sometimes late at night when I can't sleep, I still hear those footsteps in my mind, steadily approaching through the darkness. Story 11. I've been sitting on this for over 30 years now. It happened back in 1990, and I still remember it like it was yesterday. I've told a few people over the years, but most just look at me like I'm crazy or trying to pull their leg. My husband still thinks I imagined the whole thing, which is why I finally decided to share it here. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe someone will understand or have seen something similar. It was early June, and my husband Mike and I were driving down to Myrtle Beach for a much-needed vacation. We'd been married about 5 years at that point, both working full-time jobs that left us exhausted. This trip was supposed to be our chance to relax and reconnect. We left our home near Greensboro early that morning, probably around 7. Mike was tired from working late the night before, so I offered to drive the first leg of the trip. The weather was perfect, clear blue skies, not too hot yet. We had the windows cracked open, and the radio was playing softly in the background. Mike dozed off about an hour into the drive. We were heading south on Highway 220 in North Carolina. If you're not familiar with the area, it's mostly rural. Lots of pine trees, small towns scattered here and there. We were getting close to where Highway 211 meets 220, not far from a little place called Candur. It was around 10 in the morning. Traffic was light, just a few cars here and there. I remember feeling peaceful, enjoying the drive with Mike sleeping beside me. We were coming down this long, straight slope. I was doing about 60 miles per hour, just cruising along. That's when I saw it. On the left side of the road, something emerged from the tree line. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing. It was tall, much taller than a person. My first thought was, maybe it was someone on stilts, but that made no sense out here in the middle of nowhere. This figure stepped out from the trees and began crossing the highway. The way it moved was what struck me first. It wasn't lumbering or awkward. It moved with this fluid, almost gliding motion. Powerful, deliberate. Its arms swung in these long, exaggerated arcs as it walked. No, as it strode across the road. The whole thing probably lasted 5 or 6 seconds, but time seemed to slow down. I watched as this thing crossed all 4 lanes of the highway before disappearing into the woods on the other side. 4 lanes in seconds. Do you understand how fast that is? How powerful something would need to be to cover that distance so quickly? It was dark, either black or a very deep brown. The color was solid, making it stand out starkly against the pale gray of the road and the green of the grass on the median. I couldn't make out a face. It was too far away, and it moved too quickly. But I could see that it was broad-shouldered, thick through the torso and legs. Not fat, solid, muscular. I remember gasping and saying something like, "Did you see that?" I might have even hit Mike's arm to wake him up. But by the time he stirred and looked around, we had already passed the spot. The thing was gone, vanished into the trees on the right side of the road. "See what?" Mike asked, rubbing his eyes. I tried to explain what I'd just witnessed, but even as the words came out of my mouth, I could hear how crazy they sounded. There was something huge crossing the road back there, like really big, walking on 2 legs. Mike looked at me like I was pulling his leg. "Probably just a bear," he said before yawning and adjusting his seat. "They stand up sometimes." "It wasn't a bear," I insisted. "It was walking upright the whole time, moving fast, really fast." He just shrugged and suggested I was tired, or that my eyes were playing tricks on me. Maybe it was a shadow from a cloud or a large bird. He had an explanation for everything, none of which matched what I saw. I dropped it after a few minutes. What was the point? I couldn't prove anything, and I was starting to doubt myself. Had I really seen what I thought I saw? Was my mind playing tricks on me? We continued to the beach, had our vacation, and came home. But I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen on that highway. It stayed with me, popping into my thoughts at random moments. Sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, the image of that dark figure crossing the road so vivid in my mind. A few weeks after we got back, I tried bringing it up with Mike again. We were sitting on our back deck, having coffee on a Saturday morning. "You know that thing I saw on the way to Myrtle Beach?" I asked. He sighed. "Shannon, it was probably just a bear, or maybe some guy in the woods, or nothing at all." "It wasn't a bear," I said firmly, "and it definitely wasn't a person. It was at least 7 feet tall, maybe taller." 7 feet, he laughed. "Come on, nobody's that tall." "Exactly," I said. "It wasn't a person." He gave me that look, the one that says he thinks I'm being ridiculous, but he's too nice to say it outright. "What are you suggesting, that you saw what, Bigfoot or something?" I hadn't actually connected what I saw with Bigfoot until he said it. But once the word was out there, it was like something clicked in my brain. The height, the fluid movement, the dark color. It matched descriptions I'd heard, though I'd never given them much thought before. "Maybe," I said quietly. Mike just shook his head and changed the subject. That was the last time we really talked about it for years. I tried to forget about it. I told myself it was my imagination, or a trick of the light, or maybe even a dream I'd had that felt real. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen. You don't forget something like that. For years, I kept it to myself. I'd occasionally read news stories about strange sightings in North Carolina, looking for anything similar to my experience. Nothing ever quite matched. Then, around 2005, I discovered the internet was full of forums and websites dedicated to Bigfoot encounters. I spent hours reading accounts from people all over the country who described seeing something similar to what I had witnessed. The same height, the same fluid movement, the same incredible speed. One night, I found a story from someone who had been driving on that exact same stretch of Highway 220 just a few years after my sighting. They described seeing a tall, dark figure cross the road with incredible speed and disappear into the trees. I felt a chill run down my spine as I read their account. It was like reading my own experience written by someone else. I started researching the area more thoroughly. It turns out that particular stretch of North Carolina has had numerous reported sightings over the years. The Yowie National Forest isn't far from there, and it's known for strange encounters. People have reported unusual footprints, weird howls at night, and yes, occasional sightings of large bipedal creatures. The more I read, the more convinced I became that what I had seen that day in 1990 wasn't a bear, wasn't a person, and wasn't my imagination. It was something else entirely. I've tried to go back to that spot a few times over the years. The area has changed, more development, wider roads in some places, but those woods are still there, still thick and dark and full of places where something large could hide. The last time I visited was about 5 years ago. I pulled over at a gas station near where I remembered seeing the creature cross. The attendant was an older man, probably in his 70s. While he rang up my coffee, I casually asked if people ever reported seeing anything strange in the woods around there. He gave me a long look before answering. "What kind of strange are you talking about?" "I don't know," I said, trying to sound casual. "Unusual animals, maybe?" He was quiet for a moment, then said, "My daddy used to talk about the woods being haunted by something. Called it the sliding man because of how it moved. Said it was tall as a pine sapling and dark as midnight." My heart nearly stopped. "Did he ever see it?" The old man nodded slowly. "Once, when he was young, crossing a road not far from here. Said it moved faster than anything he'd ever seen. Nobody believed him, of course. I wanted to tell him that I believed his father, that I'd seen the same thing, but I just thanked him, paid for my coffee, and left. To this day, Mike still doesn't believe me. He's convinced I saw a bear or a deer or nothing at all, but I know what I saw. It was there for just a few seconds, but it changed how I see the world. It made me realize that there are things out there we don't understand, things that don't fit neatly into the categories we've created. Sometimes when we're driving on highways bordered by thick woods, I find myself scanning the tree line, half hoping, half dreading that I'll see that tall, dark figure again. I never have, but I know it's out there, moving through the forests of North Carolina with that strange, fluid grace. I don't tell many people about this anymore. What's the point? Either they believe in these things already, or they think you're crazy or lying. But I know what I saw that day on Highway 220. It was real. It was there. And for those few seconds as it crossed the road ahead of me, I glimpsed something that most people will go their whole lives never seeing. Sometimes I wish I could go back to not knowing, to believing the world is exactly as we're told it is. But once you've seen something like that, there's no going back. You just learn to live with the knowledge that there are mysteries out there, just beyond the tree line, moving faster than they should, disappearing before anyone else can see them. Story 12. I've been hesitant to share this for a long time. I mean, who would believe me? But after finding this community and reading similar experiences, I finally feel like there are people who won't think I'm completely crazy. This happened back in January of 2005, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. At the time, my daughter Emma and I were living in this rental house outside of Deer, Arkansas. Emma was 5 years old then. It wasn't anything fancy, just a 2-story place set pretty far back from the main road with a long gravel driveway leading up to it. The backyard basically melted into this dense forest that seemed to go on forever. I loved the privacy, but looking back, maybe being that isolated wasn't the best thing. It was a Wednesday afternoon, around 3:30. I remember it was freezing cold, one of those January days where your breath hangs in the air. I was bundled up in my old blue parka and had made sure Emma was wearing her mittens and hat before she left for school that morning. I'd been working from home that day, doing data entry stuff for this local insurance company. Like every school day, I walked down our long driveway to meet Emma's bus. The bus driver, Mrs. Taylor, always waited until she saw me before letting Emma off. I remember chatting briefly with her about the cold snap we were having. Emma jumped off the bus all excited about some art project they'd done in class. She was holding this paper mache thing that was supposed to be a tree, painted all green and brown. She was so proud of it. We started walking back up the driveway, Emma skipping ahead of me, then falling back, the way kids do. She was telling me about how Tommy got in trouble for eating paste again, and I was half listening, half thinking about what to make for dinner. We had just rounded this bend in the driveway where you could first see the house, when I looked up and just froze. There was something standing directly under our second-story porch. Not someone. No, not even that. It was a creature, and it was staring right at us. My first thought was weirdly calm. That's not a bear. Because that's what you'd expect out here, right? A bear. But bears don't stand upright like that, not for that long. And this thing was perfectly still, just watching us. I grabbed Emma's hand and squeezed it probably too tight. She stopped talking mid-sentence about Tommy and the paste. "Mummy, what's that?" she whispered. So she saw it too. It wasn't just me hallucinating. The creature was massive. I'm not exaggerating when I say it must have been over 8 feet tall. It had this incredibly solid body. Not fat, but just substantial. Wide shoulders, broad chest. The most striking thing was that it was covered in thick brown hair, like a shaggy coat that hung about 4 to 6 inches long all over its body. Its arms were proportionally all wrong for a human. They hung down to its knees. The legs looked powerful, muscular. But it was the face that really got to me. It had this flat, wide nose and these large, rounded eyes that reminded me of an owl's, alert, intelligent, and completely focused on us. The head wasn't pointed or cone-shaped like you see in some drawings. It was rounded and sat low between these massive shoulders. I could see dark, rough skin showing through in patches on its face where the hair was thinner. What really struck me was how utterly still it remained. It didn't move toward us. It didn't make any threatening gestures. It didn't even shift its weight. It just watched. That was almost more terrifying than if it had charged at us. I don't know how long we stood there, probably just seconds, but it felt like hours. My mind was racing. Should I run, pick up Emma and bolt back to the main road? But what if that triggered it to chase us? I decided our best bet was to just keep walking slowly toward the stairs that led up to our second-story entrance. "Emma," I whispered, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're going to walk very slowly to the stairs, okay? Just hold my hand and keep walking." She nodded, her eyes huge. God, I was so proud of her for not screaming or running. We started moving, taking this wide arc around where the creature stood. I kept my eyes on it the whole time, expecting it to move, to react somehow. But it just kept staring, turning its head slightly to follow our movement. We made it to the stairs and started climbing, one step at a time. I was acutely aware that if it decided to come after us, we'd be trapped. When we reached the porch level, we could see the top of its head just below the porch railing. That's when I really comprehended how tall this thing was. Standing on our porch, we were easily 12 feet off the ground, and this creature's head was visible from there. Emma, not fully understanding the danger, picked up some small pebbles we kept in a decorative pot on the porch and tossed them over the side. My heart nearly stopped. "Emma, no!" I hissed, but it was too late. One of the pebbles landed near the creature's foot. It didn't even flinch. It just kept staring at us with those huge, unblinking eyes. I hurried Emma inside, locked the door, and immediately pulled the curtains closed. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the deadbolt. Once inside, I sat Emma down with some crayons and paper at the kitchen table, which was far from any windows, and told her to draw while Mommy checked something. I crept to the living room window and peered through a tiny gap in the curtains. The creature was gone, vanished. I checked every window in the house, but there was no sign of it. I don't know if that made me feel better or worse. That night, I barely slept. I kept Emma in my bed, and I positioned myself between her and the bedroom door. I had grabbed a kitchen knife and kept it on my nightstand, though deep down, I knew it would be useless against something that size. Every creak of the house, every gust of wind against the windows made me jump. I kept replaying the encounter in my mind, trying to make sense of what we'd seen. The next morning, I called in sick to work and kept Emma home from school. I told myself I was being paranoid, but I couldn't shake the feeling that if we went outside, that thing might still be there, watching and waiting. By the third day, I had convinced myself that maybe it was just a very tall person in some kind of costume, maybe some local weirdo trying to scare people. But deep down, I knew better. No human moves like that, or rather, doesn't move like that. No person could stand so perfectly still for so long, and those eyes, they weren't human eyes. About a week later, I finally worked up the courage to mention it to my neighbor, Jim, who lived about a half-mile down the road. I was careful, just casually asking if he'd seen anything unusual around lately. He gave me this look, and my stomach dropped. He told me his buddy Mike and Mike's son had been hunting near Red Rock Creek just 3 days before my experience, and the son had come running back to camp, white as a sheet, claiming something like a big ape had been throwing large rocks at him from the tree line. That confirmation hit me like a ton of bricks. I wasn't crazy. We weren't the only ones who had seen something. After that, I started researching. I found reports of similar sightings in the Ozarks going back decades. People described the same features: the height, the brown shaggy hair, the long arms, the intelligent eyes. They called it Bigfoot or Sasquatch, but whatever name you give it, I know what we saw. We stayed in that house for another 4 months before I found a place closer to town. I told myself it was to shorten Emma's bus ride, but really, I couldn't stand being so close to those woods anymore. Every time I looked at that spot under the porch, I could see it standing there, watching us with those owl-like eyes. Emma still mentions it sometimes. "Remember the big hairy man, Mommy?" she'll ask out of nowhere. I always tell her yes, I remember, and quickly change the subject. I don't want her growing up afraid, but I also don't want her thinking her mother is crazy. Someday when she's older, I'll tell her the whole story. I've never seen it again, though sometimes when I'm driving through rural areas at dusk, I find myself scanning the tree line. Part of me hopes I never encounter another one, but another part of me wants confirmation, wants to know for sure that what we experienced was real. All I know is this: what stood beneath our porch that January afternoon wasn't a bear, wasn't a man in a suit, wasn't my imagination. It was something that shouldn't exist according to science, but it does. It was a Bigfoot, and it was watching us just as curiously as we were watching it. I still don't understand why it was there, or why it just stood so still. Was it trying to figure us out? Was it protecting something in the forest behind our house? Was it just passing through? I'll never know, but I'll also never forget the way it made me feel, like I was suddenly aware of how little we actually know about the world around us, how many secrets the forests still keep. Story 13. I'm honestly not even sure why I'm finally writing this down after 8 years. Maybe it's because I keep seeing more and more reports coming from East Texas, or maybe I just need to get this off my chest once and for all. What I saw that night in 2015 completely changed how I view the world, and I've never been able to look at those pine forests the same way since. It was September 9th, 2015. The date is burned into my memory. I was driving back to my place outside Huntsville after a late shift. I worked back then, at a manufacturing plant that runs 3 shifts. And I was on second shift at the time, so it was around 11:30 at night when I was heading home. The road I take is this winding rural route that cuts through thick pine forest. It's about 10 miles off the main highway, and I've driven it hundreds of times. Usually, the only things you see out there are deer, maybe the occasional armadillo or possum. That night was different, though. It was a clear night, not too hot for September in Texas. I had the windows cracked a bit, radio playing low. I wasn't tired or anything. I was actually wide awake because I'd had coffee during my break a couple hours earlier. I mention that because I want to be clear. I was completely alert and sober. What I saw wasn't a hallucination or my mind playing tricks. I was coming around this bend in the road, and my headlights swept across the right side, where there's this gravel pull-off area with a mailbox. Someone has a long driveway back into the woods there, but you can't see the house from the road. As my lights hit that area, I noticed movement. At first, I thought it might be deer. We get a lot of them around here, and they're always crossing the road at night. But as I got closer, I realized I wasn't looking at deer. I was looking at two figures standing upright by that mailbox. My first thought was that it was people. Maybe someone checking their mail really late for some reason, or teenagers hanging out. But within seconds, I knew that wasn't right either. The proportions were all wrong. There were two of them. The bigger one was crouched down at the edge of the gravel, reaching for something on the ground. I'd estimate it was about 6 feet tall, even while crouching, which means standing up, it would have been much taller. The smaller one was standing right next to it, and its height only came up to about mid-thigh on the bigger one. I started slowing down. Not intentionally at first. I think my foot just eased off the gas from shock. As my car got closer and my headlights fully illuminated them, the smaller one turned and looked directly at my approaching vehicle. That's when I saw its face clearly. God, I'll never forget that face. It was covered in short hair except for the nose, which was flat and dark brown. Its eyes were wide open, not in an aggressive way, but in what I can only describe as surprise. Its mouth was closed, and its whole body was covered in thick hair, but not super long like you see in some of those blurry Bigfoot photos. The hair looked more like a short, dense coat. Its arms were just hanging at its sides as it stood completely still, staring at my car. I'd slowed almost to a complete stop by this point, just maybe 15 or 20 feet away from them. That's when the adult, I assume it was the mother, stood halfway up and put a hand on the smaller one's shoulder. The gesture was so human, protective. It guided the little one toward the woods. They moved really quickly but stayed upright the whole time. Within seconds, they had disappeared into the tree line. I sat there in my car for maybe a minute, just frozen. My heart was racing so hard I could hear it in my ears. Part of me wanted to get out and look closer, but a much bigger part of me was terrified and just wanted to get home. I ended up driving the rest of the way home in a state of shock, constantly checking my mirrors and the woods on either side of the road. That night, I barely slept. I kept replaying what I'd seen over and over in my head. The face of that smaller creature, that child, kept appearing every time I closed my eyes. I knew what I'd seen, but I also knew how crazy it would sound if I told anyone. The next morning, I decided I had to go back. I had to know if there was any evidence, anything that would confirm what I'd seen wasn't just my imagination. I drove back to that spot around 10 in the morning. In the daylight, it looked so ordinary, just a gravel pull-off with a mailbox, bordered by dense pine forest. I parked and got out, looking around cautiously. The ground was mostly hard-packed gravel, but near where I'd seen the larger creature crouching, I found 3 distinct footprints spaced about 3 feet apart. One of them was deep enough that I could make out a clear outline. It had toes and a wide heel, much wider than any human foot I've ever seen. I didn't have a measuring tape with me, but using my own foot as reference, I wear a size 11. These prints were at least 15 or 16 inches long. Near the brush line, where they'd entered the forest, I found 2 side-by-side impressions in the softer dirt there, smaller ones, probably from where the little one had been standing. These weren't as clear, but they were definitely not human or deer tracks. I took some pictures with my phone, though they didn't turn out great. The impressions were subtle, and without the right lighting, they just looked like vague depressions in the ground. I regret not bringing something to make casts, but honestly, I wasn't thinking clearly. Later that day, after going home and really processing what I'd seen, I decided to report it. I called the local sheriff's department and told them I'd seen something unusual on that road. The deputy who took my call seemed bored and uninterested. When I finally worked up the courage to say I thought I'd seen a Bigfoot with its child, he actually chuckled. He said they'd keep an eye out, but made it clear they weren't taking it seriously. I didn't push it. What was I going to do? Insist they send out a search party for something most people think is a myth? In the days that followed, I went back to that spot several times. The footprints gradually disappeared with rain and traffic, and I never saw any other signs of them. I started carrying a better camera in my car for months afterward, hoping I might see them again, but I never did. What stayed with me most over the years isn't just the shock of seeing them, but the details that made them seem so real. The way the smaller one stared at me with what looked like curiosity mixed with fear. The protective gesture of the adult placing its hand on the child's shoulder. These weren't mindless animals. There was intelligence there. They were aware of me just as I was aware of them. Sometimes I wonder what they were doing out there by that mailbox. Was the adult teaching the child something? Were they just passing through, or were they curious about human structures? I'll never know. I've read everything I can find about Bigfoot sightings in East Texas since then. There have been quite a few reports from the Sam Houston National Forest area over the years. Some of them describe similar details: the short, dense hair rather than the shaggy appearance you see in popular culture, the wide heel on the footprints, the intelligent behavior. One thing that's really stuck with me is that I never felt threatened. Startled, yes. In awe, absolutely. But neither creature made any aggressive moves or threatening sounds. They just wanted to get away once they realized I'd seen them. I get the sense they're just trying to live their lives in those woods, staying hidden from humans as much as possible. I still drive that road nearly every day. Each time I slow down a little at that pull-off area, I look a little more carefully at the tree line. Sometimes, especially at dusk or dawn, I think I see movement deeper in the woods, but it's never been clear enough for me to be sure. I haven't told many people about this. My wife knows, and a couple close friends. Most people respond with polite skepticism at best, outright mockery at worst. I don't blame them. I wouldn't have believed it either if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But I know what I saw that night. It wasn't a bear standing upright. We barely have bears in this part of Texas anyway. It wasn't people in suits. The movements were too natural, too fluid. And the eyes of that smaller creature, there was something in those eyes, awareness, intelligence, a connection just for a split second between two completely different species. I've spent 8 years thinking about those few seconds of my life. Sometimes I wish I'd tried harder to get evidence, to make the authorities take it seriously. Other times, I'm glad I didn't. Whatever these creatures are, they've managed to stay hidden, despite all our technology and expansion. Maybe they deserve their privacy. All I know is that the forests around Huntsville hold secrets. When I drive those dark roads at night now, I'm always watching, always wondering if somewhere in those trees they're watching me too. Story 14. I've never been the type to chase myths or buy into paranormal stuff. I was always the guy who rolled his eyes when friends started talking about ghosts or UFOs. But what happened on our property outside Tensleep has completely changed how I see things. I'm still trying to make sense of it all. My wife Emily and I bought this 50-acre spread back in 2012. It was our dream, enough space for the kids to run wild, beautiful views of the Bighorn Mountains and privacy. Our property backs right up to deep forest and rolling hills. Perfect place to raise our 3 kids away from the noise and chaos of city life. For the first few years, everything was exactly what we hoped for. We built a nice ranch house, put up a barn for Emily's horses, and I even constructed a workshop where I could tinker with my carpentry projects. Our oldest son, James, 15 at the time of the incident, loved exploring the woods with me, while our younger kids preferred staying closer to the house. I first noticed something wasn't quite right around 2015. I was clearing some brush near the north edge of our property where it meets the forest. There was a line of trees that had been bent in the strangest way, not broken by wind or snow, but deliberately curved and twisted, almost like they'd been woven together. I remember thinking it was weird, but figured maybe the previous owner had some project going. But then I started noticing more odd things. Branches stacked in ways that formed these crude shelter-like structures. Not random, definitely deliberate. And they'd appear overnight sometimes. I'd walk a familiar path one day, and the next morning, there'd be freshly broken cedar limbs and shrubs in places where I knew there weren't any the day before. Our neighbor Ted, whose property adjoins ours to the east, mentioned hearing strange knocking sounds coming from the woods, like someone taking a baseball bat to a tree. Solid, deliberate knocks, not woodpeckers, not branches falling, distinct knocks in patterns of 3 or 4. When he told me that, I got chills because we'd been hearing the exact same thing, always from that north section where the weird tree formations were. I didn't want to alarm Emily or the kids, so I kept most of this to myself. But James is observant, and one evening in fall 2016, while we were walking the property line at dusk, checking for any fence damage, he asked me, "Dad, do you ever feel like we're being watched out here?" That same night, we heard it for the first time. We were maybe 200 yards from the tree line when this roar just erupted from the woods. It wasn't a bear or a mountain lion. I've heard both, and this was different. It was deeper, more powerful, almost like it reverberated in my chest. James froze beside me, and I instinctively put my arm out across him. "What was that?" he whispered, but I couldn't answer. Then we saw movement at the edge of the field. Something large was moving through the tall grass, keeping to the shadows. The sun was almost gone, but there was still enough light to make out a figure. Tall, much taller than a person should be. And it moved with this fluid, quick stride that covered ground faster than seemed possible. Whatever it was disappeared into the trees within seconds. We practically ran back to the house. I told Emily we'd heard a strange animal and seen what was probably a bear, but I didn't believe that for a second. Bears don't move like that. After that night, I started keeping a journal of the weird things happening on our property. The knocking sounds became more frequent. Sometimes we'd hear them in broad daylight, sometimes at night. The strange structures in the woods multiplied, and the smell, I can't describe it adequately, but occasionally this sharp, pungent odor would drift across the property. Not like a dead animal, though we found plenty of those too. Over that winter, we discovered 4 deer carcasses in the north woods. Each one was twisted and broken in ways that didn't make sense. Not like coyotes or mountain lions had gotten to them. The limbs were wrenched at impossible angles. Some bones appeared snapped clean in half. One had its head twisted completely backward. I've hunted my whole life and never seen predators kill or eat like that. Early March 2017 is when everything came to a head. It had been an unusually warm spring, and we were out checking the fence line again after dinner. Emily came with James and me this time. The sun was setting, but we still had a good hour of light left. We were near the barn, maybe 30 yards from the tree line, when James grabbed my arm and pointed. "Dad, look!" At first, I couldn't see anything. Then Emily gasped. "There's something behind that big oak," she whispered. That's when I saw them. 2 orange-amber eyes, glowing slightly in the dimming light, about 8 feet off the ground. They were fixed right on us, unblinking. My first instinct was to protect my family. I shouted, "Hey, get out of there!" That's when it moved. It stepped from behind the tree, and I still get goosebumps thinking about it. This wasn't a person. The shoulders were impossibly broad, covered in dark, almost black hair or fur. It stood fully upright on 2 legs, head nearly brushing the lower branches of the oak. For a split second, it just stared at us, and I stared back, completely frozen. Then it turned, and I swear to God, it covered the 20 yards to the deeper woods in about 3 strides. The speed was unbelievable. It moved like an athlete, but much, much faster. The woods closed around it, and it was gone. Emily was squeezing my arm so hard, it left marks. James was trembling. "What the hell was that?" he kept saying. We didn't sleep much that night. We sat at the kitchen table talking in hushed voices about what we'd seen. I've spent my whole life in rural Wyoming. I know every animal native to these mountains. What we saw wasn't on any wildlife pamphlet. The next morning, I walked out to the oak tree while Emily and the kids stayed in the house. The ground around it was disturbed, with what looked like enormous bare footprints pressed deep into the soft spring soil. I took photos with my phone, measured them with my tape measure. 18 inches long at least, way too big for any human. Near the tree, I found more broken branches, some as thick as my wrist, snapped like twigs, and that smell was everywhere. Musky, pungent, almost like wet dog mixed with something rotten but not quite. It made my eyes water. I followed the direction it had run, and about 50 yards in, I found a fresh deer carcass. Its neck was broken, and chunks of meat had been torn from its hindquarters. No claw marks, no signs of smaller scavengers yet, just clean breaks and tears. I didn't stick around. Over the next few weeks, the activity increased dramatically. The knocking sounds happened almost nightly, sometimes right at the edge of our yard. We'd find footprints in the mud after rainstorms. Once all the horses got spooked in the middle of the night and broke through a section of fence. When I went to round them up the next morning, I found more of those massive footprints circling the barn. Emily wanted to call someone. Park rangers, wildlife officials, somebody, but I hesitated. What would we say? That we had a Bigfoot problem? They'd think we were crazy. Besides, some part of me was worried about what might happen if people came out here with guns looking for it. So we adapted. We installed more security lights. I started carrying my rifle when working on the far edges of the property. We warned the kids not to go into the North Woods under any circumstances, but we didn't leave. This was our home, and despite everything, we weren't ready to give it up. One night in late March, I was up late in the kitchen when I heard a noise on the back porch. Not knocking this time, more like heavy breathing. I grabbed my flashlight and cautiously approached the window. When I shined the light out, I saw nothing at first. Then I raised the beam higher, and there they were again, those same amber-orange eyes, now looking directly into our house from about 7 feet up. I stood there, paralyzed, as it just stared at me. Its breath was fogging the window slightly. I could make out the silhouette of a massive head, wider than any human's, with what looked like matted hair covering it. We locked eyes for what felt like minutes, but was probably only seconds. Then it raised one enormous hand and placed it flat against the window. The glass actually flexed inward slightly from the pressure. Its fingers were huge, with blackish nails or claws at the tips. I backed away slowly, fumbling for my phone to wake Emily. By the time we returned to the window, it was gone. But pressed into the glass was a perfect, steamy handprint, easily twice the size of my own hand. That was 6 years ago now. We still live on the property. The encounters have become less frequent, but never stopped entirely. We've learned to coexist, keeping our distance from the North Woods, especially at dusk. The knocking sounds have become almost comforting in their regularity. Always 3 knocks, pause, then 2 more. I've done research since then. Read accounts from others who've had similar experiences. Some call it Sasquatch, Bigfoot, or a dozen other names. I don't know what to call it. And honestly, the name doesn't matter. What matters is that something intelligent shares these woods with us. Something that was here long before we were, and will probably be here long after we're gone. I still don't have proof that would convince a skeptic. The photos of footprints could be dismissed as hoaxes. The recordings of knocks could be explained away. But I know what my family and I have seen with our own eyes. I know what's out there in those trees. Sometimes on quiet nights, I sit on the porch and look toward the tree line. Occasionally, I raise my hand in greeting. I've never seen it respond, but I like to think it's watching, understanding. And as long as we respect its space, it seems content to respect ours. Story 15. I've always been a skeptic. Even when my daughter Emma started getting into cryptid research and Bigfoot theories a few years back, I humored her, but never really bought into it. We've owned this 100-acre property outside Pawhuska for almost 15 years now, and I always figured I knew every inch of these woods. But after what happened early last month, I don't know what to believe anymore. Emma and I have been doing these little expeditions for about 3 years now, She's 22, studying wildlife biology at college, and has always had this fascination with the unexplained. We started putting up trail cams and documenting unusual things we'd find in the woods. Weird broken branches, strange impressions in the mud, that kind of thing. I thought it was just a fun father-daughter activity, something to keep us connected now that she's grown. October 3rd was unseasonably warm. Emma was home for fall break, and we decided to check our trail cams and do a late afternoon hike. The sun was already getting low when we started, casting these long shadows through the trees that made everything look a little off. The light was doing that golden hour thing, where everything gets this warm glow right before sunset. Emma was walking maybe 15 feet ahead of me on this lower trail we don't use much. It's overgrown in spots and makes this sharp eastward bend around a cluster of old oaks. I was checking something on my phone, probably the weather, when I realized she'd stopped dead in her tracks right after rounding that bend. "Emma?" I called out, but she didn't answer. She just stood there, completely still, with her hand slightly raised. When I caught up, I immediately noticed how rigid her posture was. Her face had gone completely pale. She didn't speak, just silently pointed ahead down the trail. That's when I saw it. About 30 yards ahead stood something I still struggled to describe properly. My first thought was bear, but I knew instantly that was wrong. Bears don't stand like that. This thing was standing upright next to a small hickory tree, methodically pulling leaves from the branches and examining them. It was tall, impossibly tall. I'm 6'2", and this thing had to be at least 8 feet, maybe taller. The shoulders were what really got me, so broad and massive they seemed almost out of proportion. Its body was covered entirely in this thick, dark hair that caught the sunlight at the tips. Up close, you could see the texture wasn't uniform. There were bits of what looked like leaves and forest debris caught in it, giving it this rough, wild appearance. The head sat low between those massive shoulders, not hunched forward like you'd expect from a person trying to look ape-like, but naturally positioned as if that's just how its body was built. I couldn't make out facial features from where we stood, but the silhouette was unmistakably not human. What really chilled me were the arms. They hung longer than any humans should and moved with this fluid, deliberate motion as it reached up to pull more leaves. There was intelligence in those movements. It wasn't random destruction. It was selecting specific branches, examining what it pulled off. We stood frozen for what felt like forever, but was probably only 10 or 15 seconds. Then it shifted its weight and started to turn slightly away from the tree, as if sensing our presence. I didn't wait to see more. I grabbed Emma's arm, and we backed away as quietly as possible before turning to walk rapidly toward the house. We didn't run. Something told me running would be a mistake, but we moved with purpose, trying not to make noise despite the leaves crunching underfoot. We'd made it maybe 200 yards, almost to the gravel path that leads to our property, when we heard it. 4 distinct, deep howls echoed through the forest behind us. Each one lasted several seconds, with a depth and resonance I've never heard from any animal in these woods before. It wasn't a coyote or wolf. It was something else entirely. The sound seemed to vibrate through the trees themselves. Emma grabbed my hand so tight her nails dug into my palm. Neither of us spoke until we reached the house. Once inside, we both just sat at the kitchen table processing what had happened. "You saw it too, right?" Emma finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm not crazy." "I saw something," I admitted. "I don't know what it was, but it wasn't a bear or any animal I recognize." We avoided that section of the property for the next 3 weeks. I made excuses not to go check the trail cams. Emma spent more time indoors, which wasn't like her at all. We didn't talk much about what we'd seen, but it hung between us like an unspoken question. Then, on October 24th, after a heavy rain the night before, Emma suggested we go back. The ground would be soft enough for tracks, she reasoned, and we could bring the good camera this time. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Part of me needed to prove to myself that we'd imagined it. or at least exaggerated what we'd seen. We took the Polaris side by side instead of walking this time, parking it about a quarter mile from where we'd had the encounter. Emma had been researching interaction techniques online, wood knocks and rock clacks that supposedly facilitate communication with these creatures. I felt ridiculous doing it, but humored her by knocking a thick stick against a tree trunk every 100 feet or so. We'd been searching for about 40 minutes, finding nothing conclusive, when something hit the side of our Polaris with a loud thunk. We both jumped and turned to see a rock, baseball-sized, too heavy to have been moved by wind, bouncing away from the impact. "Did you see where that came from?" I asked Emma, my heart suddenly pounding. She shook her head, looking around nervously. I pulled out my phone, switching it to camera mode, and slowly scanned the tree line. That's when I spotted it again, partially hidden behind a cluster of young cedar trees about 20 feet away. The same massive figure watching us. This time I could make out more details. Broad nose, deep-set eyes, a heavy brow ridge. Its hair wasn't uniformly black as I'd first thought, but had subtle variations in color, darker around the face and shoulders. I managed to snap one photo before it moved, backing away with a silence that seemed impossible for something so large. The picture caught only a partial view, a dark shape with what might be an arm and shoulder visible through the foliage. It's frustratingly inconclusive, the kind of photo skeptics would dismiss immediately. But I know what I saw. We left immediately after that. Emma was excited despite the fear, talking rapidly about territorial behaviors and how the rock throwing was a known phenomenon among researchers. I just wanted to get back to the house. Over the following weeks, we found strange arrangements in our woods. Branches stacked in ways that seemed deliberate, small towers of rocks in places where rocks aren't naturally found, pieces of bark placed in patterns that don't make sense for natural dropping. We haven't had another clear sighting, but sometimes at dusk, I swear I can feel something watching from the tree line. Emma says that's normal, that these creatures are highly intelligent and cautious, rarely allowing themselves to be seen unless they choose to be. I've gone from total skeptic to not knowing what to believe. I've lived in these woods for 15 years, and suddenly I feel like I don't know them at all. Whatever we saw that day was real. It moved with purpose and intelligence. It responded to our presence, and it's still out there. I check the locks twice every night now. I've installed more outdoor lighting around the property. Emma wants to set up more trail cams and continue her research, but I'm hesitant. Part of me wants to know more, to understand what's sharing our land. Another part feels like some mysteries are better left alone. The scientific part of my brain keeps trying to rationalize what we saw. A bear standing oddly, an unusually large human playing a prank, a trick of the light in the evening forest. But none of those explanations match what we experienced. Those howls weren't from any animal I recognize, and nothing explains how something so massive could move so silently through the underbrush. Last week, I found a clear handprint pressed into the mud near our pond, far larger than any human hand, with distinct finger impressions. It had rained the night before, so it was fresh. I took photos and measurements before the next rainfall washed it away. Emma says we should feel honored. According to her research, these encounters are rare, and many researchers spend lifetimes in the woods without experiencing what we did. She thinks it's been on our property all along, watching us for years, and only recently decided to make itself known. That thought doesn't comfort me much. I still walk our property daily. Old habits die hard, but I carry bear spray now, and I don't stay out past dusk. Sometimes I hear wood knocks in the distance, echoing through the trees in patterns too regular to be natural. Sometimes I find broken branches twisted in ways that would be difficult for a human to manage. I don't know what to do with this knowledge. I haven't told anyone outside the family who would believe me. I've always been the practical one, the one who scoffed at conspiracy theories and tall tales. Now I find myself on the other side, experiencing something I can't explain. Whatever lives in our woods, it's intelligent, it's powerful, and it's aware of us in a way that suggests it's been observing our patterns and behaviors for some time. That's the part that keeps me up at night. Not the fear of something unknown, but the realization that while we didn't know about it, it's known about us all along. Emma wants to try to communicate further. I'm not sure that's wise. For now, we're keeping our distance, documenting what we find, and trying to process what this means for our understanding of the world. These woods that I thought I knew so well have become strange to me, filled with shadows that might not be shadows, and sounds that make me freeze in my tracks. I don't know what we're sharing our land with. I don't know what it wants, or why it's here. All I know is that the woods I've walked for 15 years are not what I thought they were, and I can't unsee what I saw that October evening when the sun was setting and something impossible stepped into our world. Story 16. I've never been a person who believes in crazy stuff. I'm pretty practical, always have been, but something happened 23 years ago that I still can't explain, and it honestly still freaks me out when I think about it too much. It was August 2000, and my family was on our annual summer trip to Wyoming. We're outdoorsy people, camping, fishing, four-wheeling, all that stuff. This particular trip, we were in the Shoshone National Forest near Dubois. If you've never been there, it's this incredibly beautiful remote area with mountains, forests and lakes that feel untouched by people. My parents, my Uncle Tom and I had packed up our four-wheelers and camping gear for a few days in the Absaroka Range. We'd found this alpine lake that was supposed to have great fishing, and we'd spent most of the morning catching cutthroat trout. By early afternoon, we'd caught enough for dinner and decided to explore the area a bit more on our four-wheelers. Uncle Tom and I went ahead while my parents stayed behind to pack up the fishing gear. It was probably around 2 in the afternoon. The sun was high, and it was one of those perfect summer days. Not too hot because of the elevation. Clear blue sky, just perfect. We were riding along this narrow trail through some pretty dense pine forest. The trail was winding, with a lot of fallen logs and rocks, so we weren't going very fast. I was leading maybe 20 feet ahead of Uncle Tom when I spotted what I thought was a tree stump about 50 yards ahead, just off to the side of the trail. Except then the stump moved. I hit my brakes so hard I nearly went over the handlebars. Uncle Tom pulled up beside me and I pointed. The stump was standing up, and that's when I realized it wasn't a stump at all. What I was looking at was, I don't even know how to describe it without sounding completely insane. It was a creature standing on 2 legs, and it was huge. I mean huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing towered over me, had to be at least 7 or 8 feet tall. It was covered in dark brown hair, almost black in the shadowy forest. At first, I thought maybe a bear had stood up on its hind legs, but bears don't just casually walk away on 2 legs, and that's exactly what this thing did. It turned away from us and walked into the denser part of the forest. Not stumbling or awkward like a bear would be, but walking naturally with a smooth gait like a person would walk. Except it wasn't a person. No way. I looked at Uncle Tom, and his face was white as a sheet. He'd seen it too. For a few seconds, we just sat there on our four-wheelers, engines idling, not saying anything. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. "Did you?" I finally managed to say. "Yeah." Uncle Tom nodded. His voice weirdly calm, but his hands gripping the handlebars so tight his knuckles were white. "I saw it." "What was that?" "I don't know, but I want to find out." Now, looking back, following that thing was probably the stupidest decision we could have made. But I was 19. Uncle Tom was always up for an adventure, and honestly, the curiosity was overwhelming. We turned off our four-wheelers and decided to follow on foot. We moved as quietly as we could through the underbrush in the direction the creature had gone. The forest floor was covered with pine needles, which helped muffle our footsteps, but twigs would snap under our boots every few steps, making me wince each time. After about 10 minutes of careful walking, the trees started to thin out, and we came to the edge of a small meadow, maybe 75 yards across. We crouched at the tree line, scanning the open space and the forest on the other side. That's when I saw it again. It came bursting out of the trees on the far side of the meadow, moving fast, not running on all fours like a bear, but running upright with these huge, bounding steps. In the better light of the clearing, I could see it clearly now. It was covered in medium brown hair, long and shaggy. Its head wasn't like an animal's. It was more rounded, almost human-like, sitting directly on broad shoulders without much of a neck. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and its upper body was massive, broad and muscular. It crossed the entire meadow in what seemed like seconds and disappeared into the trees, not far from where we were hiding. Uncle Tom and I just stared at each other. I couldn't even speak. My mouth had gone completely dry, and my legs felt like they might give out. "Come on," Uncle Tom whispered, standing up. "Are you serious?" I hissed. "You want to follow that thing?" "We might never get another chance to see something like this," he said, already moving forward. I don't know why I followed him. Fear and fascination were fighting it out inside me, and somehow fascination won. We crossed the meadow to where the creature had entered the trees. The grass was flattened in a clear path, like something heavy had run through it. The forest was denser here, with undergrowth that made it harder to move quietly. We followed what seemed like a trail of broken branches and disturbed vegetation for maybe another 100 yards. But the creature was moving way faster than we could, and eventually we lost any sign of it. Uncle Tom knelt down suddenly, examining the ground. "Mark, look at this." I knelt beside him. There in the soft earth was a footprint, not a bear print, not a boot print, but something else entirely. It was huge. I put my hand next to it for scale, and it was easily twice the length of my palm. If I had to guess, I'd say it was 17 to 19 inches long. It was roughly foot-shaped, with what looked like 5 toes, but broader and flatter than a human foot. The impression was deep, suggesting whatever made it was extremely heavy. A few feet away was another print, and another beyond that. We followed the tracks for a short distance, but they led into a rocky area where we couldn't see them anymore. "We should head back," I said, suddenly very aware of how far we'd wandered from our four-wheelers and how quiet the forest had become. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, just silence. Uncle Tom nodded, looking around nervously. "Yeah, let's go." The walk back felt much longer than the walk in. Every shadow looked like it could be hiding that creature, and every sound made us freeze. By the time we got back to our four-wheelers, my shirt was soaked with sweat, and not just from the hike. We rode back to the lake in silence. My parents were waiting for us, looking worried. "Where have you two been?" my mom asked. "We were about to come looking for you." Uncle Tom and I exchanged looks. "You want to tell them, or should I?" he asked. So we told them what we'd seen. I expected them to laugh or at least be skeptical, but they weren't. My dad just listened, nodding occasionally, and when we finished, he said, "There've been stories about things like that in these mountains for years. I never put much stock in them, but what?" I asked. "But I believe you saw something," he finished. "I just don't know what." We didn't stay at that lake another night like we'd planned. We packed up and moved our campsite to a more open area near a ranger station. Nobody said it out loud, but I think we were all spooked. For years afterward, I tried to convince myself it was just a bear, or maybe a guy in a suit playing a prank, though that seems ridiculous given how remote we were. I've looked at every logical explanation I can think of, but none of them fit what I saw that day. That thing walked like a human, but definitely wasn't human. It ran across that meadow with a speed and grace that no person in a costume could manage. And those footprints, I still have the pictures somewhere, though they didn't come out great on the disposable camera I had with me. I've never gone public with this story before, because I know how it sounds. I know what people would think. Hell, if someone told me this story, I'd probably think they were making it up, or were confused about what they saw. But I know what I saw. Uncle Tom knows what he saw. We saw a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. I'm certain of it. The way it moved on two legs was too natural to be a bear. The proportions were all wrong for any known animal. The footprints were clear as day. And the weirdest part, I never felt like it was aggressive or threatening. When it first noticed us, it just walked away. When it ran across the meadow, it was moving away from us, not toward us. It was just trying to avoid us, to get away from the humans invading its territory. And it did a damn good job of it too. We never saw it again, though we heard some strange calls that night at our new campsite. Not quite a howl, not quite a scream. Something in between that made the hair on my neck stand up. I don't talk about this much. Most people don't want to hear it, or they think you're crazy if you suggest there might be things in the wilderness we haven't discovered yet. But I know what I saw that day in the Shoshone forest. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a person. It was something else entirely. And sometimes, when I'm out in the woods alone, I still find myself looking over my shoulder, scanning the tree line, wondering if there's something out there watching me. Something that walks on two legs, but isn't human. Something that's managed to stay hidden all these years in the vast wilderness of North America. I don't have proof. I can't prove what I saw. But I know it was real. That day changed everything. I thought I knew about what's possible, about what might be living in the remote corners of our world, and no matter how many years pass, I'll never forget the sight of that creature bounding across that meadow, moving with a power and speed that still haunts my dreams. Story 17. I've been hesitating to share this for nearly 8 years now. It happened in October of 2016, and I still get goosebumps just thinking about it. I've been hunting since I was 12. That's over 25 years of experience in the woods, and nothing prepared me for what I saw that day. It was early October, peak bow season in Adams County, Pennsylvania. I had a good spot near Pine Ridge Lane that I'd been hunting for years. The area is pretty remote, thick forest with mostly white pines and old oak trees, lots of underbrush and laurel thickets, perfect deer habitat, which is why I kept coming back. That morning, I woke up at 4:30, same as always during hunting season. I remember checking the weather on my phone. Clear skies, around 40 degrees, with barely any wind, perfect conditions. I got dressed in my camo, grabbed my bow and pack, and headed out to my truck. The drive to my hunting spot took about 20 minutes on those backcountry roads. I parked at my usual spot, this little pull-off area where the forestry road ends. I always give myself plenty of time to walk in slowly and quietly, avoiding using my headlamp whenever possible to not spook any deer. The moon was nearly full that night, so I could see pretty well once my eyes adjusted. I was about halfway to my stand, maybe 15 minutes into my hike, when I heard it, a deep, resonating howl that echoed through the trees. At first I thought it might be coyotes, but no, this was different. It was a single vocalization, much deeper than any coyote, and it seemed to come from somewhere ahead of me. It wasn't a sound I'd ever heard in these woods before, and I felt the hair on my arms stand up despite my jacket. I paused for a minute, listening. Nothing followed the howl, so I continued walking, though more cautiously. My tree stand was about another quarter-mile in, an old oak that gave me a good view of a natural funnel where deer typically pass through in the early morning. When I reached my tree, I secured my bow to my pull rope and started climbing up to my stand, a fixed position about 25 feet up. It was still dark, maybe 5:15 in the morning, and legal shooting light wouldn't start for another 40 minutes or so. I got settled in, pulled up my bow, and just sat quietly, waiting for first light. As the darkness gradually gave way to the dim grey light of dawn, I started to make out the shapes of trees and the small clearing about 30 yards to my right. Everything was quiet, except for the occasional rustling of leaves in the light breeze. Around 6:30, I heard a commotion from the thicket of mountain laurel to my left. Before I could even turn my head, 4 doe burst out at full sprint. I mean, these deer were running, white tails straight up, bounding at top speed through the clearing and disappearing into the trees beyond. This wasn't the casual trotting of deer spooked by a hunter. They were in absolute panic mode, the kind of fear response you might see if they were being chased by a pack of coyotes. But there were no coyotes behind them, just silence. I nocked an arrow, thinking maybe a buck was pushing those doe, potentially creating a shot opportunity. But minutes passed, and nothing emerged from the laurel thicket. That's when I heard it. Heavy footsteps moving slowly but deliberately through the underbrush. Whatever it was big. The footfalls had weight to them, cracking sticks and rustling leaves in a rhythm that didn't match any deer or bear I'd ever encountered. The steps were spaced too far apart, too deliberate. My heart started racing. I remained perfectly still, trying to control my breathing as I stared in the direction of the sounds. The footsteps kept coming closer, and then I saw movement at the edge of the clearing. What stepped out from behind those trees has haunted me ever since. It was tall, I'm talking 7 to 8 feet at least, and walking completely upright on 2 legs. Its body was massive, with broad shoulders that tapered down to a narrower waist. The thing was covered in dark, matted hair that looked reddish-brown in the early morning light. Its arms were unnaturally long, hanging down almost to its knees. I couldn't make out its face clearly from my position, but I could see its head move as it seemed to scan the clearing. It walked with purpose, not rushing, just moving through, like it belonged there, like this was its territory. I was frozen in place. My bow was in my hands, arrow nocked, but I couldn't move, couldn't even think about raising it. I just sat there, trying not to breathe, hoping it wouldn't look up and see me in my tree stand. The creature was about halfway across the small clearing when more movement caught my eye from the same direction it had come from. 2 more similar beings emerged from the laurel thicket, moving faster than the first one. One was noticeably smaller, maybe 6 feet tall, and appeared to be guiding, almost pulling along, an even smaller one, which couldn't have been more than 4 feet tall. The juvenile, that's the only way I can describe it, had the same proportions as the others, just scaled down. It moved awkwardly, almost stumbling at times, while the medium-sized one kept a grip on its arm. They followed the path of the first creature, crossing the clearing quickly. The big one, which I now realized was probably a good 30 yards ahead of them, never looked back. The whole encounter lasted maybe 20 seconds, but it felt like hours. I didn't move, didn't breathe, didn't do anything but watch. After they disappeared into the trees on the other side of the clearing, I finally exhaled. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to set my bow down in my lap. That's when the smell hit me. This horrible, pungent odor like rotten garbage mixed with wet dog and something else I can't even describe. It was so strong it made my eyes water, and I had to fight the urge to gag. I sat in that tree for what felt like forever, too terrified to move. The logical part of my brain was trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. Bears, walking upright. People in suits. But I know what bears look like, and no human could move like that or stand that tall. It was at least 2 hours before I worked up the courage to climb down. My legs were stiff from sitting motionless for so long, and I nearly slipped on the climbing sticks on my way down. I didn't even bother trying to be quiet as I practically jogged back to my truck, constantly looking over my shoulder. When I got home, my wife asked why I was back so early. I made up some excuse about not feeling well. I couldn't bring myself to tell her what I'd seen. Who would believe it? Over the next few weeks, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination or the poor light playing tricks on me, but I know what I saw. And since then, I've noticed other things in those woods that I used to ignore or rationalize away, like the oddly bent trees that form almost perfect arches across some of the game trails, or the wood knocks I've heard while packing up at dusk. 3 distinct knocks followed by silence, then sometimes an answering series of knocks from a different direction, or the occasional glimpses of tall, dark figures crossing the trail far ahead of me, always at dusk or dawn, always too far away to make out clearly. but moving in that same distinctive, upright gait. I still hunt, but not in that spot anymore, and never alone, not in those deep woods. I've only told a couple of close hunting buddies about what happened, and while they didn't outright say they didn't believe me, I could see the skepticism in their eyes. But last year, one of them called me after coming out of those same woods. His voice was shaking. He said he'd found a deer carcass about a quarter-mile from my old stand. Not unusual in itself, but this one had been placed in the fork of a tree, about 7 feet off the ground. No bear or mountain lion would do that. He didn't see anything, but he said he heard wood knocks and felt like he was being watched the entire hike out. I know what's living in those woods now. I know that family, because that's what I saw, a family unit, is using those remote, densely forested hills as their territory. I've since read accounts from other hunters across Pennsylvania and Ohio who've had similar encounters. Some people call them Bigfoot or Sasquatch. Others have different names for them. I don't know what to call them, and honestly, I don't care. I just know they're real, they're intelligent, and they're watching us just as much as we're looking for them. Those woods don't feel the same to me anymore. When I drive past Pine Ridge Lane now, I feel a heaviness in my chest, like someone's watching me from between the trees. Sometimes at night I wake up suddenly, thinking I've heard that same deep howl from my bedroom window. I don't expect everyone to believe me. Hell, I wouldn't believe it myself if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes. But I know what I saw that October morning, and no amount of rationalization will ever convince me otherwise.